Chapter 1157. How dare you? The eunuch didn't expect the new emperor's son-in-law to be so daring to disobey His Majesty's orders and speak such arrogant words. His expression immediately darkened. However, when he raised his head and saw the face of the person beside the princess, his entire body trembled. He fell to his knees and said in a trembling voice, I have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. I mistook His Highness Jiang of Silla as the emperor's son-in-law. Please forgive me, Your Highness. Get up. Li Yi naturally wouldn't make things difficult for a eunuch. He waved his hand and said, Go tell His Majesty that I'll visit him later. Yes, Your Majesty. The eunuch immediately got up and ran in the direction he came from. So what if he was the emperor's son-in-law? To His Majesty, Jiang of Silla was much more important. In the Hall of Diligent Government, Li Xian suddenly slammed the table and said with a frown, What? Come find us later? How dare he? He isn't even the emperor's son-in-law yet he dares. He suddenly paused and turned his head to ask, Who did you say? Your Majesty, I didn't find the emperor's son-in-law, but I saw Jiang of Silla. Jiang of Silla said that he'll visit you later. Jiang of Silla? Li Xian was surprised and pleasantly surprised. When did Jiang of Silla return? Where is he now? The eunuch immediately replied, He's with Princess Xiaofan in the direction of Hibiscus Garden. Li Xian had already stepped out of the door when a young girl ran over and asked, Imperial Father, where's little aunt's son-in-law? Don't worry about little aunt's son-in-law for now. Li Xian squatted down and looked at her. Xiaorui, do you miss Dwainer? Imperial Father will take you to see Dwainer later. Okay? Dwainer is back. The little girl's face was full of excitement. She pulled Li Xian's arm and said, Why do we have to wait for a while? Let's go now. After she finished speaking, she seemed to have thought of something. She shook her head and said, I can't go now. As she ran back, she turned around and said, Father, wait for me. Wait for me to go back and change into some beautiful clothes. When she saw Dwainer, she was going to bring Dwainer to see that rascal who bullied her. Wasn't it just a competition to see who could jump higher? Dwainer would definitely be better than that rascal. Li Yi and Xiaofan parted at the gate of Furong Garden. He didn't need to look for Li Xian. He would definitely see him at the Li family today. He didn't return home. Instead, he left Hibiscus Garden and headed straight for the Imperial Palace. Because he was delayed by the combat examination today, he had yet to make his daily egg fried rice. Imperial Palace. After watching the competition, Emingzu went straight back to the Hall of Morning Dew. The Ministry of Rites had submitted many reports regarding the selection of the emperor's son-in-law. Recently, the Qi Kingdom, the Wu Kingdom, and even the Zhao Kingdom had made many moves. The situation was constantly changing. Although she had delegated most of the political affairs to her subordinates, she still had to handle some matters personally. A palace maid walked in and said, Your Highness, it's time to eat. After the new emperor of the Qi Kingdom ascended to the throne, he spent a long time stabilizing the domestic situation. Now that the domestic situation had stabilized, there were other movements. Zhao Yi was a very talented person. If he became the emperor of the Qi Kingdom, it would not be good for the Jing Kingdom. She was thinking about the meaning of some of the actions of the Qi Kingdom. Without raising her head, she said, Put it aside for now. What are you talking about? You can read the booklet later. The food will get cold soon. The booklet in her hand was taken away and replaced with a bowl of fragrant egg-fried rice. Li Yi leaned on the table and looked down at her. He asked, You've been eating it every day for the past few days. Aren't you tired of it? Emingzu picked up the spoon and asked, Aren't you tired of looking at Rui every day? It was not a question of whether she was tired of it. It was a question of whether she dared to be tired of it. Li Yi looked at her and asked tentatively, Did Rui come to find you? Emingzu took small bites of the egg-fried rice and nodded. She didn't do anything to you, did she? Li Yi was a little nervous. Emingzu looked up at him and asked, What could she do to me? Li Yi did not know how to answer this question. Emingzu and Rui had been fighting for so many years. She had to compete with Rui on everything. Who was better at martial arts, who had bigger breasts, who was first and who was last. Ever since Rui broke through to the master stage, she had lost her whole life. But he could not say it out loud. Otherwise, he would be adding fuel to the fire and deliberately hurt her. In order to change the topic, he picked up the booklet that she had been reading. He looked at it and murmured, "Unusual movements at the border of Qi and Zhao. Zhao Yi wants to attack the Zhao kingdom first. They are all from the Zhao family. Why do they have to do this? The Qi kingdom wants to attack the Zhao kingdom." Emingzu looked up at him and asked, "Why?" Although the Zhao kingdom was not a vassal of the Qi kingdom, it had been following the lead of the Qi kingdom for more than 10 years. A few years ago, the two countries even joined forces to attack the Jing kingdom. Why would the Qi kingdom attack the Zhao kingdom? Li Yi said, "Because Zhao Yi wants to be the ruler of the world. He can't defeat the Jing kingdom or the Wu kingdom, so he can only pick the weak ones to bully." "How do you know?" "He told me." Li Yi thought for a while and suddenly looked at Emingzu. He asked, "The ruler of the world, do you want to try? If you want, I can talk to Zhao Yi and ask him to surrender. If he can't be the empress of the Jing kingdom, he can be the empress of this world." Zhao Yi wanted to be the ruler of the world, but it did not matter who the ruler was. If what he said was true, then even Li Yi could not catch up to his strange hobby. Emingzu looked at him and asked, "Don't you already have an empress?" "Why? Isn't one enough?" Li Yi was slightly stunned. "When did I have an empress?" She took out the booklet at the bottom and handed it to him. She said, "This booklet was sent here urgently this morning." Li Yi opened the booklet and looked at it. On the 10th day of the 10th month in the 8th year of Wuren, Princess Duanrong led a volunteer army of 300,000 and attacked the imperial city of the Wu kingdom. At that time, thunder rumbled in the sky. Within a radius of 10 miles, people and animals panicked. It was said that Princess Duanrong was blessed by the mandate of heaven and had the help of the god of heaven sent by the emperor. On the morning of the 11th day of the 10th month, the imperial city was breached. When Princess Duanrong entered the city, the people of the imperial city greeted her on the streets. The Emperor Wu was captured by the imperial army in the palace. The moment the city was breached, he committed suicide in the palace with a dagger hidden in his sleeve. Although Li Yi paid attention to the news of the Wu kingdom at all times, in terms of speed of transmission, it was still not as fast as the imperial court. Yang Liuqing finally completed her path to empress. Li Yi had seen all the difficulties and obstacles along the way, and a smile appeared on his face. Seeing that Emingzu was looking at him, he hurriedly put away the smile on his face. He explained, "She is not my empress. You know, she is Rui's disciple, my martial niece. She only wanted to avenge her parents. The empress thing was just something that happened along the way." Emingzu finished eating the egg-fried rice and put down the spoon. She looked at him and asked, "If she is not, then am I? You are not an empress yet." "I am tired." Emingzu stood up and said, "I don't want to be an empress, and I don't want to be an assistant princess." Li Yi asked in surprise, "Then what do you want to do?" She looked at Li Yi and suddenly asked, "Do you still have the thing that I gave you?" Li Yi reached into his chest and took out a brocade bag. Emingzu took the brocade bag that was still warm and opened it. Inside was a lock of hair. She looked at Li Yi and asked, "Do you still remember what you said to me before?" "I remember." Li Yi nodded and said, "I said if you are tired of this kind of life, you can come and find me." "There is one more thing." Emingzu looked at him and slowly said, Emingzu, I have good news." She looked at Li Yi and her lips moved. Li Xian's voice came from outside. She returned the brocade bag to Li Yi. Li Xian strode in and saw Li Yi. He said in surprise, "You are actually here." When they were about to reach the Li Xian mansion, the little girl next to Li Yi couldn't help it anymore. She asked in a low voice, "Uncle Li, is Dwainer back?" Li Yi nodded with a smile and said, "He's back. He has been clamoring to see you all day." The little girl's face showed a happy expression. She ran a few steps and then stopped. She slowed down her pace and showed a reserved expression. As soon as they stepped into the courtyard, Li Duan ran out of the room and asked, "Father, can I see Xiao Rui now?" Li Yi looked at the little girl next to him and said, "What, you don't even recognize Xiao Rui?" The two children looked at each other at the same time. The feelings between children were always the purest, but they often didn't know how to express it. Li Duan had been clamoring to see Xiao Rui all day, but when he actually saw her, he was so happy that he couldn't even speak. He was so happy that his face turned pale and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Chapter 1158. Li Xian always appeared when he was least supposed to. For the sake of Xiao Rui, Li Yi didn't argue with him for the time being. Xiao Rui and Li Duan hadn't seen each other for more than 5 years. She was so excited that she couldn't speak. Li Yi and Li Xian walked into the room, giving them some time to be alone. "So that Muzi is you." Li Xian looked him up and down and said, Muzi Li, no wonder Shaoning lost to you on purpose. Why didn't I think of that at that time?" Li Xian had enough IQ, but he was extremely lacking in EQ. A person who was always thinking of pushing the throne to someone else was definitely not normal. Li Xian had a look of disdain. "I didn't expect you to be such a beast. You even had ideas about Shaoning. Tell me honestly, did you have ideas about her the first time you saw her?" If I remember correctly, she was only 11 years old at that time. The first time Li Yi saw Shaoning was in the 2nd year of Jing He. At that time, she was still at Sundara. At that time, he didn't even have ideas about Emingzhu. At that time, he wasn't so beastly. Even now, the 18-year-old Shaoning was just a big kid in his eyes. She was different from Emingzhu and the others. Li Yi cracked his knuckles and said, "Do you believe that I won't even have ideas about you when I'm beastly?" Li Xian knew that no matter how beastly Li Yi was, he wouldn't have ideas about him. But when he was beastly, he would hit him. He looked around and changed the topic. "Miss Lu and the others haven't come back?" Li Yi shook his head. "No." Li Xian thought for a moment and asked, "So you'll leave again?" Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "I'll leave after the new year." "What about Shaoning?" "Take her away." "What about Emingzhu?" "Take her away too." "If you all leave, what about me?" Li Xian had just sat down when he suddenly stood up and asked, "If you take Emingzhu away, what about the imperial court and the Jing kingdom?" When Li Xian said this, he sounded very righteous and confident. When he was completely shameless, Li Yi actually had nothing to say in response. Li Yi sighed and said, "You can still pass the throne to Li Han." Li Xian also let out a long sigh and said, "Little Han has become smarter these past few years. It's not easy to trick him anymore. Emingzhu will not leave." He looked at Li Yi and said, "You won't leave her here alone. Why don't you return to the capital? If anyone dares to object, I'll chop off his head." What did he mean by Mingzhu wouldn't leave? If he hadn't appeared at the wrong time and interrupted Mingzhu, who knew what would have happened? The capital is too small. Li Yi looked at him and said, "Only when you leave the capital, leave the Jing kingdom, will you know how big this world really is." Seeing the strange light flashing in Li Xian's eyes again, Li Yi knew that he shouldn't have said this. It was fine to abduct the princess, but abducting the emperor would cause him to be condemned and reviled by thousands of people. However, he would not stay in the capital for long. If he stayed here for too long, he wouldn't be able to find Rui. Li Xian looked at him, thought for a moment, and suddenly asked, "Your little martial nephew is about to sit on the throne of the Wu kingdom. Don't you want to have 2 empresses?" Li Xian's suggestion was very tempting, but his motive was not pure. Yang Liuqing became the empress for a better future of the Wu kingdom. Emingzhu became the secret empress of the Jing kingdom because Li Xian couldn't help her. What did he mean by having 2 empresses? Did it have anything to do with him? In the room, both of them became silent. Everyone had a side that was not known to others. Some people looked beautiful on the surface, but secretly looked at Peppa Pig. Li Xian was actually very pitiful. On the surface, he was the emperor of the Jing kingdom, above thousands of people, and the most powerful man on this continent. However, what he was interested in was not the throne, nor was it power. From the beginning, there were only 2 stones of different sizes. Outside the room in the yard, Li Duan covered his ears and said hurriedly, "Xiao Rui, I was wrong, I was wrong." The little girl put one hand on her waist and pulled his ear with the other hand. She said angrily, "What did you do wrong?" Li Duan said softly, "I was wrong that I didn't recognize you that day." The little girl originally thought that he was going to talk about how he used those words to anger her that day. Hearing him say that, her grip became even lighter. She said in a low voice, "Then I also didn't recognize you. It's my fault." Li Duan said hurriedly, "It's been too long. I've grown up. Of course you can't recognize me. You're not wrong, it's all my fault. But you still can't bully girls. I didn't know it was you at that time. I will never bully you." The little girl's hand changed from pinching to caressing. She asked softly, "Does it hurt?" Li Duan shook his head and said with a silly smile, "It doesn't hurt. It really didn't hurt." It was much lighter than when his aunt spanked his butt. The relationship between Li Duan and Xiao Rui was established when the two of them could not crawl. It had not been diluted by the passage of time. When Li Yi walked out of the room, the two of them were chatting and laughing as they played on the swing. Without disturbing them, he walked out of the estate and headed in the direction of the imperial palace. He had been interrupted by Li Xian earlier, so he and Emingzu had not finished talking. He was also very curious about what else he had said to her that time when he was drunk. Morning Dew Palace. Emingzu took off her phoenix coronet and changed into casual clothes. She said, "Come take a walk with me." Ever since Li Xian had moved into Hibiscus Garden, the already spacious imperial palace had become much emptier. There were no guards in the enormous imperial garden. It was already winter, but the capital always snowed late. In the imperial garden, fallen leaves covered the ground, making it bleak and desolate. After a moment of silence, Li Yi turned his head to look at her and asked, "What was that last sentence?" Mingzhu's footsteps paused. She pointed to an empty space in front of them and said, "Beat me and I'll tell you." A few years ago, of course, Li Yi would not have agreed to this request of hers. But now it was different. Although Emingzu had not stagnated in the past few years, he had made much faster progress. He could not beat Rui or a grandmaster, but Emingzu. He was no longer the Jiang of Silla that she could bully at will. Li Yi smiled and nodded. Okay. Li Yi did not seem to practice diligently, but the tortoise breathing skill that he had learned from second great uncle was practiced 24 hours a day. The grandmasters around him were Rui, Chong, Su, and Elder Tian. From time to time, he would also communicate with second great uncle. In this life, he would never be able to make a comeback under Rui. But Emingzu. When they first met, he was chased by her. Later, he was suppressed by her. Today, it was finally time for him to fight back. After Jiang of Silla and the princess entered the imperial garden, it became a forbidden area. Emingzu walked to the empty space first. She took off her coat and put it aside. For the first time, Li Yi realized that he was not the person he was 5 years ago. Emingzu was also not the Emingzu of 5 years ago. She just hadn't met her fated chance. When she became a grandmaster, Rui and her would have to compete to know who would win. While he was distracted, a strong wind came from the front. Li Yi moved his body and raised his palm to meet it. 2 hours later, Li Yi's clothes were all soaked, but he won after all. He pressed Emingzu on his lap and panted slightly. He asked, "Do you surrender?" Mingzhu's hair stuck to her face. She looked a little embarrassed. She said with a red face, "Let me go. You even wrote a letter to Rui to beat me." Li Yi looked at her and sneered. "When you asked her to spank me, did you ever think that you would have this day?" She struggled for a while, but Li Yi had sealed her acupoints. She couldn't exert any strength at all. Li Yi slapped a certain part of her body and said, "In the martial world, there are some debts that must be paid. Rui hit me 18 times that time. I remember every one of them. At that time, I thought that one day, I will pay you back 18 times, one by one." This was a once-in-a-blue-moon opportunity, and he might not come across it again in the future. Li Yi's slap landed, and his face revealed an expression of revenge. Emingzu lay on his lap. After a moment of silence, she said, You said that if I got tired of this life, I would go to you and you would marry me." Li Yi couldn't slap her anymore. "Really?" He looked at her with some suspicion. He had guessed it right. She wanted to cheat him into marrying her when he was drunk and didn't remember what had happened. "It's fake." She struggled to get up and looked at Li Yi. She asked, "If it's fake, will you still marry me?" Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "Yes." After saying the word yes, he was stunned for a moment. Maybe for 2 seconds. Then, he quickly got up from the ground and ran outside. Chapter 1159. The world is really unfair. Li Yi sensed the malice from the chants. He taught Tai Chi to Rui, and Rui became a guru. He kissed Mississippi Lu, and Rui also became a guru. He could understand these two ways of breaking through. Rui had accumulated a lot of experience, and she was enlightened because of Taiji. Rui had been thinking about him for a long time, and now that she had gotten what she wanted, it was not difficult for her to figure it out. But what happened to Emingzu? I only spanked her 10 times. Why did she also become a guru? Did I accidentally open up her conception and governing vessels and let her become a guru in an instant? Maybe he could ask Lu Luo to put up more advertisements in the martial arts world. I have rich experience in assisting, and I am a professional in giving chances to help people become guru. Only available to women, and 20% off for group purchases. For more information, please go to Rui City. The address is... He had just taught Mingzhu the principle that he had to pay for what he had done. Now Mingzhu was teaching him the truth again. When Li Yi faced a grandmaster, it was not that he could not fight back. But Rui and Mingzhu had been stuck at a critical point for many years. All they needed was a kiss and a few pats, pats, pats. So once they made the breakthrough, they could already suppress ordinary gurus. Of course it was like playing with him. Now she was lying on top of him. To be exact, she was riding on top of him. Run! Why don't you run? Mingzhu looked down at him from above and said expressionlessly, just like 5 years ago, you can run. Li Yi sighed and grabbed her hand. With a little force, she lay on the grass with him. A long time ago, when the academy was just built, the two of them used to lie on the grass by the lake for 2 hours. Of course at that time they lay separately. No. Li Yi put his arm around her shoulder and said, I will take you with me. She lay on Li Yi's arm and suddenly asked, How far are you and Rui now? What do you mean? Did you hug her? Li Yi nodded. Did you kiss her? Li Yi nodded again. And then? Nothing. Li Yi shook his head. She turned her body, looked at him and kissed him. Her lips parted on Li Yi's face and said, Now we are the same. No. Li Yi shook his head and said, She kissed on the lips. She hesitated for a moment, and this time, Li Yi felt a soft touch on his lips. However, time passed even faster, and before he could feel it, it had already disappeared. You even stuck out your tongue. This time, Li Yi didn't wait for her to kiss him and took the initiative to kiss her. 2 hours. What were you two doing inside? Li Xian stood outside the Imperial Garden for 2 hours. His feet were numb. He knew that Li Yi and Mingzhu had gone inside, so he did not go in to disturb them. However, he did not expect that they did not go in for a walk. They actually stayed inside for 2 hours. Mingzhu, who always paid attention to her appearance, had messy hair. Li Yi was even more embarrassed. Even his clothes were torn, and there were a few strands of grass in his hair. These evidence were enough to prove that they had just had an intense and long exercise on the grass. This was a bit too long. Li Yi had seen Li Xian 3 times today. Fortunately, he finally had some vision for the last time and did not directly barge in like he did in the morning. He looked at Li Yi and Mingzhu and said solemnly, I have something important to tell you too. When the usually frivolous Li Xian spoke to them with such an expression, it meant that he really had something important to tell them. Mingzhu nodded and said, Let's go back and talk. Morning Dew Hall. Li Xian looked at the two solemnly and asked, You two are leaving? Mingzhu looked at him and then nodded. Li Xian let out a long sigh and said, I don't want to be the emperor. Li Xian had never wanted to be the emperor. So Li Yi and Mingzhu both looked at him and waited for his explanation. You both know that I am not cut out to be the emperor, Li Xian looked at them and said. Mingzhu has left. I can't handle the matters of the court. Li Yi nodded and said, We know. Li Xian sighed and said, I know that Mingzhu has her own life and her own happiness. I don't have the power and I don't want to hold her back. But, I don't want to be the emperor. Actually, being the emperor isn't that difficult. Below the emperor, there are still the prime minister and all the civil and military officials in the court. You don't have to decide everything, big or small. Li Yi looked at him and said, You might as well hurry up and have a son with the empress and imperial concubine. When he grows up, you can pass the throne to him. Since ancient times, when the situation of a country stabilized, the emperor could be a mascot. As long as he didn't make any big mistakes, he only needed to supervise the officials and the country would continue to run smoothly. Speaking of this matter, the expression on Li Xian's face became even more sorrowful. He had already given birth to 3 children, 2 for the empress and 1 for imperial concubine. But, all 3 of them were daughters. Perhaps he really didn't have the same fate as Li Yi. I might not be able to make it. If Qin Er's pregnancy this time is a daughter. He suddenly looked up at Li Yi and Mingzhu and said, Why don't you try? they definitely wanted to try, but although his and Mingzhu's future child would have the surname Li, he wouldn't be able to inherit the throne of the Jing kingdom. Li Xian's plan as Rui would be in vain. Speaking of which, it was difficult to break through to Grandmaster, but it was even more difficult for a Grandmaster to get pregnant. Now that Rui and Mingzhu had both become Grandmasters, if they wanted to have children in the future, they would have to go through the same hardships that he and Rui had gone through in the past. Li Yi didn't think it was impossible. A lifetime was long, and hard work paid off. As long as he changed a few positions and tried a few more times, he would succeed one day. He didn't know if his situation would be better if he became a Grandmaster. Apart from other things, at least his waist wouldn't be so weak anymore. Before Li Yi and Mingzhu could answer, Li Xian shook his head and said, "No, even if you can give birth, it will be more than 10 years later." "I can't wait that long." Li Yi looked at him for a long time and said, "There are so many princes in the Li family. You can just pass the throne to one of them?" Li Xian looked at him and said, "Do you think I'm stupid? If I really pass the throne to someone else, do you think we can still live?" It seemed that he wasn't as stupid as he thought. Li Yi looked at him and said, "Just accept your fate. Only you being the emperor is the best. Anyone who wants to be the emperor will not have a good ending." Li Xian seemed to understand something. He looked at him and asked, "You mean, only those who don't want to be the emperor are the most suitable?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "I didn't say anything. There are countless princes who want to be the emperor. The only ones who don't want to be the emperor are probably you and Xiaofan." In the Mathematics Institute, Li Han, who had just solved a difficult mathematical problem, was different from usual. He didn't feel excited at all. Instead, he felt an inexplicable annoyance. A beautiful girl walked in and said with a smile, "Brother Han, I cooked lotus seed porridge. Try it while it's hot." Li Han felt even more bitter when he saw the beautiful girl, but he still squeezed out a smile and said, "Thank you, Sister Wang." Chapter 1160. "Sir, how do you solve this question?" Li Han asked him with a question. Li Yi glanced at it and felt it was strange. Although this question required a lot of twists and turns, with his ability, he could solve even more difficult questions. It was strange that he couldn't solve this one. However, everyone had a blind spot in their thinking. This was normal. When Li Yi picked up the pen and was about to tell him, Li Han asked casually, "Sir, is Duanwu not at home?" She took Duaner and Xiao Rui outside to play. Li Yi didn't raise his head. "Why are you looking for her?" "Nothing." Li Han shook his head and suddenly said, "Sir, I suddenly understand how to solve this question. I'll solve it myself first. I'll come back tomorrow to show you." Li Yi put down the pen and looked at him. "Duanwu is not at home tomorrow either." "Then after Li Han realized something was wrong as soon as he opened his mouth. He immediately said, "I just have something to talk to her about. I still have some doubts about mathematics. I'll come back in a few days to ask Sir." Li Yi drank some water and asked, "You're not wondering about mathematics, but why Duanwu ignores you?" Li Han froze in place. After a moment he sighed and said, "A girl's mind is even harder than a mathematics question." Li Yi looked at him and asked, "If you want Duanwu to pay attention to you, you have to first tell me who the younger sister of the Wang family is?" Li Han sighed again and said, "Her name is Wang Ling-er." The Wang family and the royal family had always had a close relationship. 7 or 8 years ago, they had bet on the right treasure and married their first daughter to Li Xian, who was still the heir. Now that the heir's wife had become the empress, the Wang family had become the most famous family in the capital. Wang Ling-er was Wang Qin's younger sister. Her engagement to Li Han was even before Li Xian and Wang Qin. Li Yi didn't know if the Wang family was betting everywhere or if the Wang family's master's eyes were really extraordinary. He only found out after asking Li Han that it was the latter. The Wang family only had 2 daughters. One was married to Li Xian. One had been betrothed to Li Han since she was young. Wang Linger and Li Han were childhood friends. Speaking of which, the Dragon Boat Festival only appeared later. Unfortunately, there were some things that didn't care about first come, first served. There was no way to reason this out. Is there no way to make a girl not be jealous? Li Han looked at him and asked for help. "Sir, what should I do?" In his eyes, the teacher could teach him more than just arithmetic. He had so many mistresses. If he had 1/10 of his teacher's ability, he wouldn't have made things like this. It was a woman's nature to be jealous. A woman who wasn't jealous wasn't a woman. even when Wanru and Rui would get jealous for no reason, not to mention the jealous Rui. If he knew how to stop a girl from getting jealous, he wouldn't have been beaten up so badly by her in the past. Li Han was just left out. Back then he risked his life every single time, living under the threat of autumn water, living in fear. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Tell me the truth. Do you like that sister from the Wang family?" Li Han pondered for a long time before saying, "Ever since she was young, she always followed behind me in everything. I treated her like a younger sister. I would beat up anyone who bullied her. At that time, Lady Mother told me that she would be my consort. We promised when we were young that I would marry her when I grew up." Li Yi continued to ask, "Do you like her?" "I like the Dragon Boat Festival." Li Han looked up at him and said, "But I can't hurt the sister from the Wang family. She trusts me the most. Sir, I really don't know what to do." Relationships were complicated. Li Yi could teach him arithmetic, but he couldn't teach him these things. Should he break the engagement with the Wang family and choose to be alone for the rest of his life? He could live a carefree life with the Dragon Boat Festival and leave the Wang family's childhood sweetheart alone until she grew old, or marry someone else and live a depressed life. Or he could keep his promise and give up on the Dragon Boat Festival and complete the engagement with the Wang family. Or there were other choices. These were all decisions that Li Han had to make himself. Even if Dragon Boat Festival was his sister, he wouldn't give Li Han any guidance on this matter. Li Han left. Before he left, he didn't get any answers from Li Yi. Li Yi picked up the teacup and found that there was no water left in the cup. A figure came out from the back of the hall and refilled his cup. Li Yi looked at Dragon Boat Festival and asked softly, "Do you blame me?" He could tell Li Han that he didn't care about the engagement. A good man was the one who courageously pursued true love. He was Dragon Boat Festival's brother, so he naturally had to think for her first. If it was 7 or 10 years ago, before he came to this world, when he first came to this world, he would have told Li Han to pursue free love. This was what a young man should do, however. He wouldn't do that now. This wasn't the modern world after all. There were rules here. Maybe Dragon Boat Festival would be sad because of Li Han's choice. Maybe the other girl's hair would turn white overnight because of him. However, these were all his choices. The girl shook her head and said, "Actually, they met first. Brother, am I too jealous? I ignored Li Han because I wanted him to leave Wang Linger. Am I very bad?" There is no order in this matter, and there is no right or wrong. Li Yi stood up and patted her shoulder. He said, "I believe that you will handle everything well." The Mathematics College and the Women's College were on vacation. When Li Yi and Xiaofan walked around the college, they could only see some servants. The teachers and students had already gone home. Xiaofan has locked himself in the Mathematics College for the past few days. He said that he wouldn't come out until he proved the theorem. He didn't want to see anyone. Xiaofan looked at a building in the distance and said worriedly, "I'm really worried that he will get sick from holding himself in." Li Han already knew that the theorem wasn't something he could prove in his lifetime. He was just avoiding it. He said that he wouldn't see anyone, but in fact, he just didn't dare to see two people. A beautiful girl came from the front and bowed to Xiaofan. She said, "Greetings, Sister Ning Er." Xiaofan looked at her and asked, "Ling Er, you went to see Xiaofan again?" The beautiful girl nodded and said, "Brother Han needs to use his brain every day. I cooked some lotus root and pork rib soup. It can nourish the blood, replenish the marrow, calm the nerves and strengthen the brain. Go." Xiaofan nodded and said, "He likes pork rib soup the most." She looked at Xiaofan and bowed to Li Yi before leaving. "Then I'll go first." Xiaofan sighed and said, "I just saw that Dragon Boat Festival had passed. I don't know what Xiaofan will do." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Let them worry about their own matters." Xiaofan looked at the pavilion in the middle of the lake in the distance and said, "I haven't gone fishing in a long time. Let's go fishing by the lake." "Okay." Li Yi nodded. Xiaofan revealed a smile on her face. She subconsciously held onto Li Yi's hand and walked forward quickly. After 2 steps, she seemed to realize something and quickly let go of his arm. Her face once again revealed a reserved expression. Li Yi still liked to see her innocent and unaffected appearance. She didn't want to change herself for others and pretend to be reserved. "Ning Er." Li Yi looked at her and said, "You can do whatever you want in the future. Don't worry. No matter what you are, I like you." Her body trembled. She raised her head and looked at Li Yi. After a long time, the reserved expression on her face disappeared. She held onto his arm and happily said, "Then let's go fishing first. Then we'll go to the streets. I want to eat candy, people. I want to eat 10. At the entrance of a small building in the academy, the beautiful girl looked at the girl in front of her. Her face was slightly flustered. She quickly said, "I only cooked some soup. I didn't know that Sister Dragon Boat Festival had also cooked. I'll go back first." Dragon Boat Festival looked at the girl who hurriedly turned around and was about to leave. Her face revealed a complicated expression. Pa! A crisp sound of porcelain breaking came from behind. The beautiful girl turned her head and saw that the soup bowl in Dragon Boat Festival's hand had fallen to the ground and shattered into pieces. "It's all my fault." Dragon Boat Festival walked over and looked at her. She said with some distress, "The soup has been poured away. We can only let him drink Sister Ling Er's soup. Let's go up together." Chapter 1161. Li Han's seclusion officially ended, not because he proved Goldbach's conjecture, but because Wang Linger gave him a bowl of soup during the Dragon Boat Festival. This bowl of lotus root and pork rib soup was not only good for the brain, but also for the body. After drinking the soup, he immediately came back to life. When he was grilling the fish, his movements became faster. This way, the fish was more tender, more uniform, and more delicious. In the past few years, Li Han had been obsessed with mathematics and the Dragon Boat Festival, so he did not neglect his skills in grilling fish. The fish had just been caught by Shou Ning. The academy had protected this lake very well. The fish in the lake were delicious and naturally free of pollution. Whether it was steamed, boiled, stewed, or barbecued, they were all very good ingredients. Li Xian did not have such good fortune this time. He did not bother Li Yi for the past 2 days because the Empress was pregnant again. The due date was around the new year, so he had to stay by her side. Xiaoning fed Li Yi a piece of fresh fish and asked, "When are we going back to Rui City? I haven't seen Xiaomu for a long time." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "After the new year." He did not know when they would come back after leaving the capital this time. The journey was long. Although the old lady was healthy, she had to plan the route well to minimize the bumpiness and fatigue. Moreover, before leaving, she had to see some old friends in the capital and say goodbye to some people. Xiaoning suddenly lowered her head. Her eyes were a little dim. She said, "I have asked my mother. She said she wants to stay in the capital and will not go with us." Concubine Yan was the wisest woman Li Yi had ever met. This kind of person was usually very assertive. Xiaoning wanted her to leave with them, but she refused, so there was no room for negotiation. Moreover, as the old imperial concubine, she could not leave the capital city as she pleased. Li Yi held her hand and said, "Don't worry. I will come back with you to see her every year." Xiaoning's eyes lit up again. She suddenly leaned over and kissed him on the cheek. Then, she blushed and lowered her head to work on the grilled fish in front of her. In the distance, Li Han was flipping the roasted fish. He withdrew his gaze and let out a long sigh. "Big brother Han, if you're tired, you should rest for a while." The beautiful girl walked over, took out a handkerchief, and gently wiped the sweat off his forehead. Li Han peeked at Duan Wu, who was standing at the side. When he saw that her face did not reveal any unusual expression, he was delighted and flipped the iron skewers in his hand even faster. The Jing Kingdom had undoubtedly become the center of the world. The capital was becoming more and more prosperous, gathering merchants from various countries. Because of geographical factors, although the prosperity of the business in the capital could not be compared to Suzhou and Rui City, overall, it was already the largest city in the known surrounding countries. Here, one could eat the sugar figurines of the Jing Kingdom, the Wu Kingdom, the Qi Kingdom. Li Yi could not tell the difference between these sugar figurines, but according to Xiaoning, each kind of sugar figurine tasted different. 18 years old was actually the time when a girl was in her prime and the most lively. She, who had regained her original nature, appeared more real, which was what Li Yi hoped to see. Some people did not need to mature and grow up. She could be a child for the rest of her life, as long as she was willing, as long as she was happy. Walking on the street, from time to time, she would stuff some snacks into his mouth. Li Mu would probably like Xiaoning very much. Her gluttony was similar to Zue Mo's. Every street in the capital was very noisy, but when the two of them walked to a certain place, they could still hear a clear conversation in front of them. I've finally found you, Peng. It's time to settle the score between us. You black-hearted thing. How dare you sell us a fake test paper for 10 taels of silver? It's fine if you sell us the fake test paper, but you actually hid the real test paper and passed the written test alone. At the entrance of a restaurant, a few scholars in green who were supposed to be gentle and elegant were now punching and kicking a person on the ground with violent expressions. A woman looked panicked. She pulled the scholars in green and said repeatedly, "Stop beating him, stop beating him. How much money does he owe you? We'll pay you back, we'll pay you back." However, those people ignored her. They waved their hands impatiently, pushed her away and said angrily, "You can't blame us for doing such a dirty thing even if you beat him to death." "Young masters, please calm down, calm down." An old man walked out of the restaurant and hurriedly said, "A few days ago, there were countless people selling fake scrolls in the capital. He must have stolen a few copies. If you continue to fight like this, someone will die." Of course, those people also knew that this fatty was only one of the countless people who had stolen the test papers. However, the problem was that he clearly knew that there were real test papers, but he still used fake papers to deceive them. He overcame all the obstacles along the way, passed the written test and the martial test, and almost became the emperor's son-in-law. Thinking about how they worked hard to memorize the questions, only to find out that they did not get a single question right after they took the exam. They almost died suddenly in the exam, and after they came out, they were seriously ill for 3 days. This was intolerable. "Go away." One of them shook off the old man and kicked the person on the ground fiercely. He said angrily, he dared to sell fake test papers back then, he should have expected this day. After kicking him a few times, he still could not vent his anger. He picked up a long bench from a roadside stall and smashed it hard at him. In the end, the bench in his hand did not land on the person on the ground. A young man grabbed the bench in his hand and looked at him. He said, "It's wrong for him to sell fake test papers, but it's reasonable for you to buy fake test papers. You've hit him and you've scolded him. Enough is enough." The green-robed scholar saw that the other party was about the same age as him, but he acted like he was teaching someone a lesson. He felt even more indignant and said angrily, "Who do you think you are?" Smack. Li Yi gave him a backhand slap. Although he did not use much strength, that person was still sent flying. He lost a few teeth and lay on the ground, unable to recover for a long time. The other companions next to that person were also stunned on the spot. It was the first time in their lives that they had seen someone sent flying with a slap. For a moment, they did not dare to rush forward. However, they moved and surrounded Li Yi and Xiaofan. One of them quickly ran into the distance. Li Yi looked at Xiaofan and asked, "Are you hungry?" Xiaofan nodded in embarrassment. Li Yi smiled and said, "Then let's go in and eat something. This restaurant used to taste pretty good. I wonder how it is now." The old man from the restaurant walked to his side and whispered, "Young master, you should leave quickly. You won't be able to leave in a while." One of the young men glared at the old man, and the old man immediately stopped talking. Li Yi looked at the fatty lying on the ground and said to the woman beside him, "You guys come in too." Although the woman did not know the person in front of her, he was definitely not a bad person since he had helped earlier. Seeing his outstanding temperament, she could not help but be influenced by him. She only hesitated for a moment before nodding. She helped the fatty on the ground up and walked in. The old man's expression changed slightly. He looked at a waiter behind him and said, "Quick, go and get the shopkeeper here." Inside the restaurant, although the fatty's face was bruised, he still struggled to get up. He cupped his hands at Li Yi and said, "Thank you for your help just now, brother." He looked at the young man in front of him and then at the woman beside him. He didn't know why, but he felt that he had seen this woman somewhere before. Even this brother of his felt that she was very familiar. "You don't recognize me now? Didn't you say that we were fated when you sold me the fake exam papers?" Li Yi looked at him and said with a strange expression. The fatty's expression changed when he heard this. He trembled and said, You. He was a little terrified. If the person in front of him had also bought his fake exam papers, could it be that he wanted to beat him up by asking him to come in? Li Yi looked at him and said with a smile, "If you hadn't cheated me of 5 coins, I would have kicked you a few times outside." You. Only one person had bought the fake exam papers from him for 5 coins. The fatty immediately remembered that this person was Mu Zi. However, they did not look alike at all. If he was Mu Zi, then he would be the emperor's son-in-law. Then, wouldn't the woman beside him be? Pang Er turned his head to look again. He finally understood why he felt so familiar with the woman. He suddenly felt his legs turn to jelly and he almost fell to the ground. The old man walked in from the back door of the restaurant and pointed in front of him, saying, "Shopkeeper, it's them." A middle-aged man walked in front of him. The man did not look old, but his hair was already white. There was another sturdy man beside him. When Li Yi looked over, he was slightly startled. Then he could not help but laugh. Chapter 1162. In the backyard of the restaurant. Qin He looked at Li Yi with a smile, cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Jiang of Silla." Wu Er stood beside him and smiled honestly, looking a little embarrassed. Qin He looked to his side and said, "This is His Highness Jiang of Silla. Hurry up and greet him." Four women stood beside him and said in unison, "Greetings, His Highness Jiang of Silla." Among the four women, Li Yi recognized one of them. She was Miss Lin of Silla, who had stirred up the entire capital with an unjust case several years ago and caused the Chu family to go from prosperity to decline. He had never seen the others before. After the four of them greeted each other, they left. Qin He looked at him and explained, "The three of them are Qin Er's sisters." No matter how much he explained, he could not hide the fact that he was a beast. He might as well not be called Qin He and change his name to Beast. Li Yi looked at him and shook his head slightly, saying, "I haven't seen him for several years, but Fifth Master has become such a beast." Qin He looked at Shanning, who was sitting beside Li Yi, and said with a smile, "Compared to Jiang of Silla, we are the same." They were all beasts and beasts would always feel a sense of intimacy because they were of the same kind. Li Yi looked around and asked, "Fifth Master is not in Qin Manor. When did he become the shopkeeper of this restaurant?" "Qin Manor is too big, but there are not many people. I am not used to living here." Qin He smiled and said, "After father passed away, I sold Qin Manor and bought this restaurant. When I am free, I am a shopkeeper. It is not bad." Prime Minister Qin had already passed away a year ago. This old man had devoted his entire life to the Jing kingdom. In his later years, his family was ruined and he only had one son by his side. The rise of the Qin family was caused by Prime Minister Qin, and it also ended with Prime Minister Qin. Fortunately, the last few years of his life were peaceful, unlike Grand Tutor Chu, who ended up being cursed by thousands of people. 3 years ago, Grand Tutor Chu died of depression, and the Chu family became history. A generation of Grand Tutor Imperial Tutor had fallen to such a state. It was sad and lamentable. Before my father passed away, he always wanted to see you. Qin He helped him refill his cup of tea and said, "In those years, Grand Tutor Chu was despised by everyone. People began to call my father the scholar's bone of Jing Kingdom." He said that he wasn't a scholar's bone. He was just a bag of old bones with a bit of a scholar's persistence. Qin He looked up at him and said, "He said that you are the bone of the Jing Kingdom, the real bone. Before you appeared, there were no bones in the Jing Kingdom, but now there are." Unfortunately, he can only see that after the Jing Kingdom has a bone, he can only stand up and walk forward 1 step, 2 steps, but he can't see any further. Li Yi looked at him and suddenly asked, "Don't you hate him?" "Hate? Of course I hate him." Qin He nodded and said, "He was a good prime minister, but not a good father. Otherwise, the Qin family wouldn't have fallen to such a state. But," as he spoke, he smiled and waved his hand, saying, "It's all in the past. Everything is fine now. People still have to look forward and not always look back." As for Qin He, Li Yi couldn't give much of an evaluation. He was one of the few people he had met who understood. He admired and admired him. Perhaps it was because the two of them were both beasts in some aspects. Qin He drank a cup of tea and said, "This time, the Jiang of Silla returned to the capital, but there was no news from the capital at all. I really find it a bit strange." Li Yi heard the meaning in his words. It was nothing more than every time he returned to the capital, he would cause a commotion in the capital, wanting everyone to know that he was back. This time, he was a little too low-key. He smiled and put down the cup. He stood up and said, "There will be news soon." Crash. In the restaurant, a young official with half of his face swollen flipped over a table and said angrily, "Where is he? Come out." As he walked into the restaurant, more than 10 young people came in one after another. These people had outstanding temperament and were dressed luxuriously. At first glance, one could tell that they were not ordinary people. Behind them, a group of officials quickly came in. Peng Er sat on the innermost stool. Seeing this scene, his body trembled. These people were all the sons of famous officials in the capital. How could they be alarmed? He immediately whispered to the woman beside him, "Quick, go to the back and tell that brother not to come out." After saying that, he realized that the person who bought the fake test papers with 5 copper coins was not an ordinary person. That was the current emperor's son-in-law. Moreover, with Her Royal Highness by his side, what did he have to be afraid of? The ones who should be afraid were those people. At this time, Li Yi and Shaoning had already come out from the back. The official with the swollen face pointed at Li Yi and said loudly, "That's him." A young man beside him looked at him and said with a frown, "You guys were beaten like this by him alone. Do you need to come to the county government to ask for help?" A man behind him smiled and said, "If I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have come to watch the show. What a waste of food and wine." As they talked, they didn't notice that behind them, several people's faces had changed dramatically. Their lips couldn't stop trembling, and they couldn't even stand steadily. Li Yi turned to look at Qin He and said, "It's not easy to take advantage of you. Give me all your specialty dishes." Qin He looked at Wu Er and said, "Go and arrange it. You're about to die and you still want to eat." Half of the young official's face was swollen, and he couldn't speak clearly. He pointed at Li Yi and said, "That's him." The young man beside him looked at the yamen runners behind him and said, "What are you waiting for? Take him back to the county government first." The guests in the restaurant had already run away when these people came in. Li Yi and Shaoning picked a table and sat down. The group of yamen runners came to them. Seeing that they were so calm, they didn't dare to act rashly. Seeing this, the young man who had just ordered them was about to get angry, but he was pulled by someone behind him. The man said in a trembling voice, That seems to be Jiang of Silla." "Jiang of Silla?" Hearing this, the young man was stunned. For a moment, he didn't remember that there was a Jiang of Silla in the capital city. The next moment, when he came to his senses, his legs began to weaken, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. It had only been 2 years since his father was transferred to the capital city, but he couldn't be more familiar with the legendary Jiang of Silla. This was a man who had once stirred up the entire capital city, the entire Jing kingdom, and affected the general trend of the world. His legs were weak, but he couldn't let them go. He forced himself to gather some strength, took 2 quick steps forward and shouted, "Stop!" Seeing that their young master had spoken, the group of yamen runners immediately retreated to the side. The young man took a deep breath, took 2 steps forward, bowed, and said in a trembling voice, "Greetings, Jiang of Silla, His Highness Jiang of Silla, this is a misunderstanding." Thump! Someone's legs went weak. It wasn't the stuttering young man, but Peng Er. The person who sold the fake exam papers wasn't the emperor's son-in-law, but Jiang of Silla. No, it was the emperor's son-in-law. Jiang of Silla was the emperor's son-in-law. Jiang of Silla was the emperor's son-in-law, and the emperor's son-in-law was Jiang of Silla. He felt like he had discovered an incredible secret. Would he be silenced? "Greetings, His Highness Jiang of Silla." "Greetings, Your Highness." Seeing this, the dozen or so people also walked forward, trembling. Their faces were pale, and they all bowed to pay their respects. At this moment, their hearts were filled with regret. Why did they have to join in on the fun? The group of people almost surrounded the table. Li Yi looked back at them and said, "Why are you all standing here? Do you want to sit down and eat?" Chapter 1163. Being invited to a meal by Jiang of Silla, in the entire capital, there were only a few people who had this kind of qualification. What these young people felt at this moment was naturally not that they were overwhelmed by the favor, but that they were terrified. They were extremely regretful in their hearts. Why did they have to join in the fun today? At this moment, they were in a dilemma, but they did not dare to block the way, and they all retreated to the corner. And the servants accompanying them hurriedly left. As for the young scholar with a swollen face, his face was already ashen, paralyzed on the ground, and even his lips could not move. Li Yi looked back at the fatty and said, "Do you want to sit down and eat together?" "No need, no need." Peng Er hurriedly shook his head and said, "Thank you, Your Highness Jiang of Silla." Sitting at this table, one was Princess Shaoning, and the other was His Highness Jiang of Silla. The matter of him selling fake test papers to His Highness Jiang of Silla was enough for him to brag for a lifetime. Eating at the same table with His Highness Jiang of Silla and Princess Shaoning, What virtue or ability did he, Fatty Peng, have? Even the smoke on his ancestral grave did not dare to emit like this. Li Yi no longer forced him. He looked at him and said, "You can be considered to have hands and feet. If you use your mouth to do business, you will definitely not lose money. In the future, it is better to do less of this kind of thing." The woman next to Peng Er knelt in front of Li Yi and hurriedly said, "Brother Peng sold fake test papers just to treat my seriously ill mother. Please forgive him this time, Your Highness. We will definitely return the money in the future." He was wrong to sell fake test papers, but those who intend to cheat are not righteous people. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "In the future it will be fine." Peng Er nodded and said, "I will definitely remember Your Highness Jiang of Silla's teachings." Li Yi looked at him and suddenly asked, "Are you interested in working at Jiang of Silla's residence?" He had had 2 brief encounters with Peng Er. Although his act of reselling fake exam papers seemed to be beneath him, the fact that he was able to stand out among all the fake exam dealers in the capital and successfully attract so much hatred showed that he still had a lot of redeeming qualities. After all, there were so many unscrupulous dealers in the capital who sold fake test papers, but he was the only one who was beaten on the street. This kind of person was born to do business. After they left this time, the Li family still needed a reliable person to take care of the business. This Peng Er would be of great use if he was properly trained. Peng Er was stunned at first, but after he realized it, he immediately knelt on the ground and said, "Li family, of Li family, Your Highness, Jiang Silla, Your Highness, Your Highness." Li Yi waved his hand and motioned for Peng Er to get up. A middle-aged man in official robes walked in from the door. He tidied up his clothes and said respectfully, "This lowly official is the capital's magistrate Linda. Greetings, Your Highness Jiang of Silla and Princess Shaning." When Li Yi left, the capital's magistrate was still Lu Dayo. Now that Lu Dayo had become the capital governor, this new magistrate was a new face. His face was a bit frightened as he said, "This lowly official was not strict enough and alarmed Your Highness. Please punish me." Li Yi looked at this magistrate and asked, "Fighting in the street with no regard for human life, what about the law?" The middle-aged man looked at the young man with a swollen face and immediately said, "Your Highness, rest assured, this lowly official will investigate this case and punish it according to the law." Li Yi looked at Shaning and asked, "Are you full?" Shaning nodded and said, "I'm full." Li Yi stood up and looked at the magistrate and said, "I'll leave this to Magistrate Lin." The magistrate immediately bowed and said, "Your Highness, please rest assured." Li Yi waved at Qin He and said, "Let's go." "Send off Your Highness." The magistrate immediately bowed and said, "Take care, Your Highness." Li Yi and Shaning walked out of the restaurant and parted ways with Peng Er and the woman. They walked towards the Jiang of Silla's residence. In this big capital, there were not many people who could talk to him nicely. Qin He was one of them. Although he lived like a beast, he was also free and easy. He immersed himself in his own world and didn't care about the outside world. He was a smart person who could see through the world. At the entrance of the restaurant, Wu Er looked in the direction Li Yi disappeared in before looking away. Wu Er scratched his head and murmured, "His Highness seems different from before, but I can't tell what's different." Qin He smiled and said, "In the past, His Highness Jiang of Silla was like a sharp sword, showing off its edge. The current His Highness is still a sword, just that he has hidden the edge of the sword." Wu Er scratched his head. Although he still didn't understand, he was used to Fifth Lord not speaking human language. When they walked into the restaurant, the magistrate walked up and said with a smile, "I'll get someone to compensate for the restaurant's loss. There's no need for it to be doubled, just compensate at the original price." Qin He waved his hand and said, "Thank you in advance, magistrate." The magistrate's heart skipped a beat. This restaurant manager and Jiang of Silla seemed to be familiar with each other. His background should not be small. A smile appeared on his face again and he said, Of course, of course." After walking out of the restaurant, most of the young masters heaved a sigh of relief. They wiped the cold sweat off their foreheads and felt like they had survived a disaster. One of them heaved a long sigh of relief and said, "Fortunately, we didn't offend Jiang of Silla." It's said that a few years ago, when Jiang of Silla wasn't Jiang of Silla, many young masters of the top families in the capital city were dragged to the palace gates to be flogged because they offended him. They couldn't get out of bed for a few months. There was another time when more than 10 important officials of the imperial court had to personally go to a restaurant to retrieve their juniors. It could be said that they were completely humiliated. As the crowd heaved a sigh of relief, They looked at one person in the crowd and said gratefully, "Thank you for reminding us just now, Brother Zhang. Otherwise, this would have led to a disaster." The young man they called Brother Zhang was still pale. He looked at them and said with a trembling voice, You think it's over?" He wiped the sweat on his palms on his clothes. These people had not experienced some things, so how would they know the fear of the entire capital city being dominated by Jiang of Silla? This was not the end, but just the beginning. Jiang of Silla had returned. This capital city would probably experience another huge shock. In a certain official's mansion, an official who had just rushed home looked at his son and asked in horror, "Did you have a conflict with Jiang of Silla just now?" "No conflict, no conflict." The young man immediately said, "We just went to watch the show. We definitely didn't have a conflict with His Highness Jiang of Silla." "Watch the show?" The official picked up a bamboo stick and hit him. He said angrily, "Is His Highness Jiang of Silla's show something you can watch?" The young man looked at him and said tentatively, "Father Jiang of Silla. Jiang of Silla didn't say anything and just let us leave. Nothing big happened, right? What do you know?" The middle-aged man glared at him again and immediately walked out of the room. He said loudly, "Someone, prepare a generous gift, the thicker the better." At the same time, many official residences in the capital city had carriages full of gifts and were gathering in the same direction. Shui Mansion. Old General Shui drank the wine in his bowl and laughed. "Little brat, every time you come back, you cause such a big commotion. You don't even know to come to the Shui Mansion to take a look." An old woman poured him another bowl of wine and said, "His Highness Jiang of Silla's status is different now. When you see him you can't act like this again." "What's wrong with Jiang of Silla again?" Old General Shui curled his lips and said, "I lent the pillar that Jiang of Silla slept on when he went to court." Zheng Mansion. On this day, Zhang Shichen, who was already the Minister of Revenue, changed into casual clothes and walked out of the mansion. Capital Governor's Mansion. On this day, Capital Governor Lu Daiyou did not bring any attendants with him and hurriedly left. Chapter 1164. Since returning to the capital, Li Yi had been staying with the Li family and had not returned to the Jiang of Silla estate. Today, the main gate of the Jiang of Silla estate was open for the first time in several years. In front of the gate, there was an endless stream of carriages and sedan chairs. Most people put down their gifts and left in a hurry without even stepping through the gate. In the past few years, the Jiang of Silla estate had only left a few servants to clean the courtyard. This time, the officials and nobles of the capital had gathered, and the servants in the estate were somewhat overwhelmed. Shaning simply transferred some of the maids and servants from her princess residence over just to help them carry the gifts. Of course, not everyone put down their gifts and passed through the gate without entering. "Where's Zumo and Xiaomu?" This was the first thing Zhang Shichen said after seeing Li Yi. Li Yi shook his head and said, "They're in Rui City. They didn't come back this time." Seeing the anticipation and excitement on Zhang Shichen's face disappear in an instant, Li Yi glanced at Li Yi and said indifferently, "You're back." A mere minister of revenue dared to speak to him like this. After not seeing each other for a few years, Lord Zhang had become a lot more arrogant. However, for the sake of Zumo and Xiaomu, Li Yi did not argue with him for his lack of manners for the time being. Lu Daiyou walked over quickly with an excited expression on his face and said, "Your Highness, you're back." Lord Lu's attitude was much better than his predecessors by many times. "It's been 2 months since Zhang left the capital to investigate the unjust cases. I'm afraid he won't be back in a short time." Lu Daiyou looked at Li Yi and said with some regret, "He must be very happy to know that your Highness has returned to the capital." Hearing Lu Yizhang's name, Zhang Shichen looked at him and couldn't help but say, "Your Anqi County is really full of talents." Old Zheng was right. Lu Daiyou had originally been the magistrate of Anqi County. In less than 10 years, he had climbed to the position of the capital governor. He had reached the pinnacle of being a local official. As for Lu Yi, he had been promoted from an insignificant constable to the current Minister of Justice. His position was the same as Zhang Shichen's. He could be called a legend in the bureaucracy. The former magistrate of Qing and Dong Wenyun was now the Minister of the Right. The former Anqi County lieutenant was now a king. No one would believe that there were so many big shots in a small county. The three of them sat in the courtyard. Li Yi ordered the kitchen to prepare a few dishes and a pot of wine. Lu Daiyou couldn't let go of him because of his identity. Zhang Shichen ignored him because he didn't see Zhu Mo. After a few glasses of wine, they all started to talk. Your Highness. Lu Dao picked up a mouthful of food and said, Back in Qing'an Prefecture, I knew that your Highness was not an ordinary person. The small Anqi County couldn't trap you. The luckiest thing that happened to me in my life was to be the magistrate of Anqi County. He chuckled. That's what I thought too. After being the capital governor and the Minister of Justice for so long, I actually missed the days back in Anqi County. Lu Dao didn't have a high tolerance for alcohol. Even though it wasn't hard liquor, he was soon drunk. He leaned on the table and muttered to himself. Zhang Shichen drank unhurriedly. After Lu Dao was drunk, he took another sip of wine and said slowly, Back then, Big Brother was framed. In order to protect the Zheng family, he took all the blame. His family was destroyed. At that time my official rank was too low, and I could only watch. Later, I climbed to the position of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue and repeated what that person had done to Big Brother. Later, I let him die on the road of exile. Revenge was taken, but the Zheng family was no longer the Zheng family. Later, when Zumo came to the capital, she didn't want to acknowledge me as her second uncle. She liked me so much when she was young. Zhang Shichen took a big gulp of wine and smiled. I still have to thank you for this, Your Highness Jiang of Silla. He picked up the wine pot and drank to his heart's content. Then, he stood up and patted his shoulder. Don't let Zumo be wronged. I beg of you. Zhang Shichen walked away reeking of wine. Li Yi knew that he wasn't drunk. In this world, there were always some people with special plots. Princesses and empresses were considered normal. There were also sister Khan, daughter Khan, and niece Khan. Some of these people had dirty thoughts, and some were pure. They really protected and loved each other from the bottom of their hearts. Changde walked out of the backyard. His breathing was a little chaotic. This wasn't common for a grandmaster like him. Unless another grandmaster forced his breathing to be chaotic. Emingzu, on the other hand, appeared calm and composed. A chrysanthemum-like smile bloomed on Changde's old face. He bowed and said, This old servant is no longer a match for your highness. Li Yi felt a little sad. Even Emingzu had broken through. When would his opportunity to become a grandmaster come? On second thought, even if he broke through, he wouldn't be able to defeat Chang, Su, or even Emingzu and Rui. What was the point of such a breakthrough? Li Duan held Xiao Rui's hand and ran out from the backyard. The two of them had been separated for several years, but these days, they were inseparable. When he ran past Lao Chong, he halted, bowed and said, Master. Xiao Rui also looked at Emingzu. Auntie. She didn't know who Changde was, so she didn't know how to greet him. She just called him master like Li Duan. Li Duan looked at Emingzu and hesitated for a moment before saying, Auntie. Before Li Yi could correct him, he ran outside with Xiao Rui. The Zhao Kingdom has sent an ambassador. Emingzu sat beside him and said, In the past few months, Zhao Yi personally led the army and broke through the cities of the Zhao Kingdom with irresistible force. Now, half of the Zhao Kingdom has fallen into the hands of the Qi Kingdom. Li Yi thought about it and asked, The Zhao Kingdom wants to borrow troops? Emingzu nodded and said, What the courtiers mean is that although we have old grudges with the Zhao Kingdom, if the Qi Kingdom conquers the Zhao Kingdom, it will become a greater threat to us. In order to prevent the Qi Kingdom from growing stronger, we should send troops. Li Yi shook his head and said, I'm afraid it's too late. Sending troops was not something that could be done on a whim. Not only did they have to mobilize the troops, they also had to prepare rations and pay for the troops. In addition to the long journey, by the time the troops guarding the borders received these orders, it would already be too late. This time, it could be said that Zhao Yi had made up his mind to go crazy. He was the kind of person who would kill anything that stood in his way. His expansion would eventually become a serious problem for the Wu Kingdom and the Jing Kingdom. Neither kingdom would sit by and do nothing. It was because he knew this that he sent troops so quickly and wanted to conquer the Zhao Kingdom in the shortest time possible. When the Zhao Kingdom was completely conquered by the Qi Kingdom, it would not be easy to touch them. Emingzu nodded and said, Even if it's too late, we have to be prepared. Once the Qi Kingdom grows stronger, they will eventually point their spear at us. Li Yi shook his head and said, Zhao Yi is a smart man. Without heaven's punishment and cannons, he will not send troops to the Jing Kingdom or the Wu Kingdom. The emergence of gunpowder and cannons had made the Jing Kingdom and the Wu Kingdom look like they had turned on a cheat code. In terms of military strength, they had rapidly advanced to the forefront of the world. Coupled with suitable tactics, they were almost invincible. Zhao Yi knew this very well. Without heaven's punishment, he would not dare to do so. The two of them were discussing this matter in the courtyard. Outside the courtyard, Li Duan and little Rue were sitting on the swing. Suddenly, he turned his head to look at her and asked, "Little Rue, will you marry me in the future?" "Of course." The little girl turned to look at him and said matter-of-factly, "We've agreed. Are you going back on your word?" No. Li Duan hurriedly shook his head and said, "However, if you marry me in the future, you can't call that aunt anymore." "Why not?" The little girl blinked and looked at him curiously. "What else can I call you if not aunt?" "Call me mother," Li Duan thought for a moment and said. "Also, the little auntie who gave you the candy just now, you can't call her little auntie. You have to call her Lil Miss like me." The affairs of the Zhao Kingdom were attended by countless important officials in the imperial court. A few days before the new year, Li Yi went out to visit a few old generals and gave them the gifts he had received a few days ago. Then came the new year. On the third day of the first lunar month in the 5th year of Jingping, something big happened in the capital city. Even for the entire Jing Kingdom, this was a major event. On this day, the Empress gave birth to a baby boy. Both mother and child were safe. Chapter 1165. Li Xian was so happy that he went crazy. Seeing him stand up and sit down and stand up again with an uncontrollable excitement on his face, Li suddenly felt a little distressed for Li Xian's son, who didn't even have a name until now. His name was the Emperor. Empress Wang Qin gave birth to 2 princesses, and imperial concubine Shen Su gave birth to a princess. Li Xian's hair was about to turn white from worry. If Xiao Rue was a prince, Li Yi felt that Li Xian had already titled himself as the emperor. The next day, Li Xian announced the news that the empress's legitimate son would be the crown prince. If it wasn't for the fact that his youngest son couldn't even crawl, then the imperial edict would be the succession edict. The one who was obviously relieved was Li Han. Li Yi clearly felt that he walked a lot more briskly. Li Han was 17 years old this year, which was definitely considered young. Young people were prone to make mistakes and didn't think about things comprehensively. Most of the time they could only see the surface. Li Xian's crown prince didn't even have teeth. Even if he was educated according to the standard of an emperor, it would take at least 10 or 20 years for him to be able to take charge. Li Xian couldn't wait for 10 or 20 years. Therefore, before Wang Qin gave birth to the crown prince, Li Xian still had a bit of face. He would take into account all aspects and not pass the throne to Li Han. Now, he would not pass the throne to Li Han, but His Royal Highness Prince Jin couldn't run away. Because the crown prince was still young. When the emperor experienced the suffering of the people, he needed someone to assist him. Looking at Li Han talking to Duan Wu with a smile on his face, Li Yi couldn't bear to break his dream, so he let him sleep a little longer for the time being. This year's court meeting was not on the first day of the first lunar month. Those days were the empress's due date. In the royal family, this was a first-class event, so the date of the court meeting naturally had to be postponed. Now, it was a double happiness. Li Yi originally did not want to participate in the Grand Court Assembly, but he wanted to see what Mingzu looked like wearing a phoenix crown and a phoenix cloak. She would only wear those clothes when she was in court. Shaning, who was in charge of the Women's Union and many colleges in the capital, would also appear at the Imperial Court Conference. The Qi Kingdom, the Wu Kingdom, and the Zhao Kingdom had all sent envoys to the Jing Kingdom. This time, they didn't just send envoys casually. Instead, they sent envoys to the Jing Kingdom with formal etiquette. This was probably the pinnacle of diplomatic relations in the history of the Jing Kingdom. Your Highness Jiang of Silla. Greetings, Your Highness Jiang of Silla. During the distance from the palace gate to the political hall, all the officials that Li Yi met, some of whom he knew, some of whom he did not, bowed to him. Old General Shui sighed and said, "I still remember the first time you stood here a few years ago. Back then you were just a young boy. In just a few years, you are already standing in front of us, the old fellows who have been in the court for decades." The few old generals usually did not attend court, but they would not miss the annual Grand Court Assembly. Old General Ma stroked his beard, and a look of reminiscence appeared on his face. The few of us only noticed you because of Tianfa. Who would have thought that you were hiding so much more than just Tianfa? Compared to you, we are really old. Li Yi smiled and said, since ancient times, the waves behind beat the waves in front, and the waves in front die on the beach. This is normal, normal. Old General Shui suddenly looked at him and shook his head. He said, you have changed a lot over the years, but your shamelessness has always been on par with old man Ma. Surnamed Shui, in terms of shamelessness, I am still 10 feet away from you. Li Yi smiled as he watched the two of them start their daily bickering. Then, he turned around to take a look. He was sitting at the front of the court. Li Xian had sent someone to bring a chair over, but he had rejected it. From his position, there were more than 100 civil and military officials in the hall. They stood orderly, and their faces were full of smiles, mixed with a trace of pride and arrogance. Behind them, there were still countless figures outside the hall. No matter how big the legislative hall was, it could not accommodate all the officials who had come to the capital to attend the Grand Court Assembly. This was the Jing Kingdom. The Jing Kingdom that he did not have any sense of belonging to in the beginning. Now, step by step, he had completely integrated into the Jing Kingdom. At a certain moment, the hundreds of officials suddenly bowed at the same time and said loudly, "Welcome, Your Majesty, welcome, Princess Royal." After Li Xian sat down, he raised both of his hands and said calmly, "Everyone please rise." After that, it was time for the Grand Court Assembly to go through the proper procedures. Since ancient times, emperors have established themselves in order to rule over the world. They must establish a dynasty and establish the foundation of the country, so that the ancestral clan and society can rest without borders. I, the emperor, have been trembling all night and look up to my ancestor, Mo Lai. My legitimate son, Li Zhe, is a hero, and belongs to the will of the heavens. I hereby abide by the first imperial edict, record the ceremony, bow down to the will of the people, and sincerely inform the heavens and the earth, the ancestral temple, and the country that I hereby confer the title of Crown Prince and appoint him as the Eastern Palace's Crown Prince. This was the first imperial edict announced by the eunuchs in the Grand Court Assembly. Li Xian's intention to shift the blame to others had been going on for several years. This little fellow, Li Zhe, became the Crown Prince on the first day of his birth, and became the future master of the Jing Kingdom. He had only been in this world for less than 24 hours, but Li Xian had already praised him to the heavens. Words like talent and outstanding were endless. The hundreds of officials could do nothing about it, and there were countless people who looked bitter. How could they, as the officials, not know what His Majesty was thinking? However, it was not easy for the Empress to give birth to a legitimate son, so no one would raise any objection at this time. The second imperial edict was to expand the number of members of the State Affair Council. The original number of members of the State Affair Council was increased from 15 to 20. The State Affair Council was an institution proposed by the eldest princess several years ago. The members of this institution were composed of 2 prime ministers, 6 ministers, the imperial censor, the governor of the capital, and several important officials. Among them, the name of Prince Jin, Li Han, was also included. No one was allowed to monopolize the power when there was a difficult decision to be made. The members of the State Affair Council had to discuss and make a decision together, and then report it to His Majesty or the eldest princess. His Majesty had no objection to this proposal. In recent years, the decision of the State Affair Council had been passed by His Majesty and the eldest princess. To some extent, the existence of the State Affair Council allowed His Majesty to be lazy with a clear conscience. This made the hundreds of officials doubt His Majesty's intentions more than once. However, this was indeed beneficial to the country, so no one could raise any objection to it. Every member of the State Affair Council could be a prime minister. From then on, all the officials in the imperial court and even the literati of the Jing Kingdom aimed to enter the State Affair Council. The imperial edict to appoint the Crown Prince and increase the number of members of the State Affair Council were the 2 most important matters. What followed was a long and tedious report from an official that everyone loved to listen to. Within these 4 hours, they would know the changes in the military, economy, politics, population, and system of the Jing Kingdom in the past year. The Jing Kingdom had been making progress every year. They had God's punishment and cannons, which could intimidate all the other countries. Chapter 1166. 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, none of the officials in the hall would have imagined that one day, they would be able to witness such a grand court conference. Politics, economy, population, agriculture, commerce. Almost every aspect that they could think of was developing at a gratifying speed. In the past, they could not see the future of the Jing kingdom because they were confused. Now they still could not see the future of the Jing kingdom because the Jing kingdom's development had far exceeded their imagination. Of course, the Grand Court Conference brought not only joy but also worry to the officials. Especially after Chen Chong, the provincial governor of Suzhou, presented the memorial, almost half of the people in the court changed their expressions. They were suspicious, shocked, incredulous, and deeply regretful. This was the first time Chen Chong, the provincial governor of Suzhou, attended a Grand Court Conference. Regardless of whether it was the old officials who had been in the court for decades or the new officials in the court in recent years, the name Chen Chong was no stranger to them. In the past, the Duke of Chen's household had been so illustrious. Although it could not cover the sky with one hand, in the capital, a brick thrown on the street could hit a marquee. The Chen clan was already one of the top clans. The Chen family used to be glorious. Later, because they were involved in the Cui family's rebellion, they declined overnight. Later, they completely disappeared from the capital. Some people knew that he had become the provincial governor of Suzhou in the fief of the Jiang of Silla, but some people had completely forgotten about him. Today this man, who was once a prominent figure in the capital, once again walked in front of the people. He brought a few pieces of news. In the past 5 years, the population of Suzhou had officially surpassed the capital and became the most populous city in the Jing kingdom. The tax revenue of Suzhou last year was 20% of the tax revenue of the entire Jing kingdom. This did not exceed the tax revenue, which saved them some face. But that was only Suzhou. The tax revenue of Suzhou was 20% of the tax revenue of the Jing kingdom. This meant that Suzhou alone was equivalent to more than 10 provinces in the Jing kingdom. But this had nothing to do with them. Because as early as 5 years ago, the court officials unanimously discussed and almost couldn't wait to give all the tax collection rights of Shu province for the next 50 years to Jiang of Silla. They even gave the entire Shu province to Jiang of Silla. At that time, they were still wondering if they should give 2 more. At the time, they had thought that as long as he could leave the capital, anything would be fine. 5 years ago, a prefecture in the Jing kingdom was worth more than 10 Shu prefectures. 5 years later, Shu Prefecture was worth more than 10 ordinary prefectures in the Jing kingdom. It was more than 100 times more. It had only been 5 years. No one knew what would happen in Suzhou in 50 years. All the officials in the hall were filled with regret. They couldn't help but turn their heads to look at the figure standing at the very front. They didn't know whether to feel fear or respect. Li Yi had been watching the progress of the Imperial Court Conference. After the officials of the various prefectures in the Jing kingdom finished their reports, it was time for the envoys from other countries to meet the emperor. Several years ago, the Jing kingdom was weak. The envoys of Qi and Zhao acted like they were in their own garden in the golden palace of the Jing kingdom. Their words and actions were quite inappropriate. But now, the situation was completely different. After presenting the generous gifts, the envoys of the small countries showed their subservience. The envoys of the Wu kingdom didn't send any gifts. Her Majesty just sent someone to deliver a letter of credence. In the first month of the 5th year of Jinghe, the Wu kingdom and the Jing kingdom officially established diplomatic relations. From then on, they would be friendly neighbors, non-aggression, trade barriers would be removed, and trade with each other. The gifts sent by the envoys of the Zhao kingdom were very generous. Because they came to ask for help. The army of the Qi kingdom was approaching the imperial city of the Zhao kingdom. If the Jing kingdom didn't lend a helping hand, it wouldn't take long for the Zhao kingdom to disappear in the long river of history. Although the envoys of the Qi kingdom were not as enthusiastic as those of the Wu kingdom, they also expressed their intention to establish diplomatic relations. When they presented themselves, the envoys of the Zhao kingdom kept a straight face from the beginning to the end. The Imperial Court Conference started in the morning and lasted for several hours. It didn't end until the afternoon. A few of the old generals and some of the senior officials in the court had already been given a seat by Li Xian before the court session had even begun. The younger officials, on the other hand, had been standing the entire time. When the court session ended, almost all of them were limping. It was just a few hours. Li Yi didn't feel anything. After the Imperial Court Conference was over, he was the first to leave. He didn't walk far when he heard a hurried voice behind him. "Your Highness Jiang of Silla! Your Highness Jiang of Silla!" The voice was very familiar. Li Yi turned around and saw Wei Liang jogging toward him. Wei Liang came with the envoy of the Wu kingdom. Li Yi saw him just now. It was just that it wasn't convenient to talk to him in that situation. Li Yi and Wei Liang hadn't seen each other for a long time. He smiled and asked, "How is your empress?" Wei Liang smiled and said, "Her Majesty has just ascended the throne. Everything is fine. It's just that she's a little busy with the affairs of the state every day. To wear the crown, one must bear its weight. Emingzu was like that. Yang Liuqing was also like that. The Wu kingdom had just settled down. There were many things waiting to be done. Of course, she would be very busy. There were many things that she had never touched before. However, he had Old Man Wang and the others to watch him. He wouldn't make any big mistakes. "Brotherly, long time no see." Another voice came from his side. Li Yi turned his head and saw Yang Yanzhou, who had just walked out of the hall. He was here on behalf of Zhao Yi. His purpose was naturally to stop the Jing kingdom from helping the Zhao kingdom. However, the imperial court of the Jing kingdom had already made a decision on this. Although the Jing kingdom and the Zhao kingdom had old grudges, the Qi kingdom was ambitious. They would never let the Qi kingdom become stronger. Half a month ago, the order to stop the Qi kingdom and help the Zhao kingdom had been sent out urgently. By now, the Jing kingdom's army at the border of Qi and Zhao must have taken action. Li Yi shook his head and said, "What are you doing here instead of staying by Zhao Yi's side? Zhao Yi must know that no matter who he sends, it will be useless." Yang Yanzhou smiled and said, "I have to try to know whether it will be useful or not." "Now that you have tried, is it useful?" Yang Yanzhou shook his head with a bitter smile. Li Yi was too lazy to talk about these things. He waved his hand casually and said, "Before I came out, there was still soup in the pot. If you don't want to talk about national affairs, you can come to the mansion of Jiang of Silla when you have time." "Of course." Wei Liang waved his hand. Yang Yanzhou smiled and said, "In that case, I will pay a visit to Brother Li tomorrow." The officials who came out of the hall were surprised to see His Highness Jiang of Silla and the envoys of Qi and Wu talking cheerfully and wittily. It was obvious that this was not the first time they had met each other. They naturally did not think that Jiang of Silla had committed treason. However, even the envoys of the Qi kingdom and the Wu kingdom seemed to be on good terms with him. Whether he was in the capital or not, Jiang of Silla was still the same Jiang of Silla. An official looked at the back of Jiang of Silla disappearing. He quickly took a few steps forward and said to the slowly walking Prime Minister Shen, "Prime Minister Shen, Shu Province cannot be handed over to Jiang of Silla like this." Chapter 1167. The Shu province of today was no longer the Shu province of the past. The Shu province of today was practically the largest treasury of the Jing kingdom. In just 5 years, it had surpassed the capital in terms of population and economy. Who knew what it would be like in 50 years? A country within a country? This was something that he absolutely did not want to see. This was also something that all the officials in the court did not want to see. Even though they had unanimously decided to give Shu province to the Jiang of Silla a few years ago, what was credibility? What a country needed was always profit. The official walked up to Shen Xiang and said hurriedly, "Just now in the hall, you must have heard what Provincial Governor Chen Chong said. The Shu province is so rich now. The court must take it back." Shen Xiang, who had been walking slowly, stopped in his tracks. His eyes turned cloudy. He looked at the official and asked, "What did Minister Wei just say?" The middle-aged official looked at him and repeated, "We must take back Shu province from the hands of the Jiang of Silla." Shen Xiang asked doubtfully, "The Jiang of Silla? What's wrong with the Jiang of Silla?" The middle-aged official moved closer to him and raised his voice. "The Jing kingdom's Shu province cannot fall into the hands of the Jiang of Silla again." Shen Xiang asked in surprise, "Shu province? What's wrong with Shu province?" The middle-aged official was speechless. Shen Xiang pointed at his ears and smiled. "I'm getting old. My ears don't work so well anymore. Minister Wei, please don't blame me. I was thinking a few days ago that these old bones of mine really couldn't hold on any longer. I was planning to resign from His Majesty in a few months." The middle-aged official was shocked. He immediately said, "Prime Minister Shen is the pillar of the court. You are a role model for us officials. If you leave, who else can suppress the treacherous officials in the court?" Shen Xiang sighed and looked at the middle-aged official. He said, "For a country, although benefits are the most important, we can't just care about the benefits in front of us. We have to live up to our own conscience and the conscience of the world." The official opened his mouth. "Prime Minister Shen, without the treacherous officials you speak of, there wouldn't be today's Jing Kingdom, and there wouldn't be today's Minister of Wei." Shen Xiang looked at him. His back was no longer bent, and his eyes were no longer turbid. He spoke again. "His Majesty hasn't said anything. Minister Wei, you don't have to worry about these things." Before Prime Minister Shen left, he looked at him again and said, "Today, the people standing in the court already owe him too much. We can't owe any more. If we owe any more, I'm afraid we will suffer retribution." After Shen Xiang left, the middle-aged official stood there in a daze. He only felt that his throat was a little dry. He licked his dry lips. Shen Xiang's words were very clear. If he insisted on targeting Jiang of Silla, Shen Xiang would not help him. At that moment, he finally realized that Jiang of Silla was much more terrifying than he had imagined. However, he was only thinking about the Jing Kingdom. What did he do wrong? Confusion and hesitation appeared on his face. He slowly took a step forward and disappeared in the direction of the palace gate alone. When Li Yi came out, the pot was really stewing soup. The soup had been stewing for a few hours, and the taste was very rich. Ever since he realized that he had underestimated Mingzu, he picked up the skills that he had put aside for many years. She only had a low starting point, but there was a lot of room for her to grow, far beyond Li Yi's imagination. Shaning ran over and said pitifully, "I also want to drink Royal Sister's soup, but she won't give it to me." Li Yi patted her head and said, "Your Royal Sister has to deal with so many affairs of the country every day. She needs to nourish her body. I'll make your favorite soup later." The soup that Mingzu drank naturally couldn't be given to Shaning. It wasn't because she didn't need it, but she was only 18 years old. At the very least, it would take a few more years for Li Yi's beastly and guilty feelings to dispel. After finishing the soup for the two of them, he still had to do other things. This time, when he left the capital city, he would come back to accompany Mingzu and Shaning. He wouldn't make such a big fuss. Therefore, the Jiang of Silla residence, which had always only accepted gifts but not given gifts, was finally generous for a while. Today, Li Yi held a banquet in the residence. It wasn't a big banquet, but he sent invitations to all who he thought needed to say goodbye. The first person to visit was Lu Yi. He had just finished patrolling the Beijing-Hebei region. After entering the small courtyard, he quickly walked up to him with a slightly excited face. "Your Excellency, you're back." When he was still a county lieutenant, Lu Yi called him Your Excellency. This form of address had almost never changed over the years. Li Yi habitually patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, "You're already a minister. Show some of the minister's manner and aura." The minister of the Ministry of Justice, who had always been impartial and upright, showed an embarrassed expression at this moment. Lu Daiyou and Zhang Shichen visited him at the same time. Both of them came from the Anxi County government, so they naturally contacted each other frequently in the past few years. For some reason, Zhang Shichen also hooked up with the two of them. Two ministers and a governor of the capital city had already occupied 3 seats in the State Affairs Council. As soon as Lu Daiyou and Zhang Shichen sat down, Li Yi heard a rough voice. "Ha ha ha, little Li, I've known you for so many years, but this is the first time I've taken advantage of you. Today, take out all the good wine in your residence. I want to drink to my heart's content. Little brat, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You must treat me with good wine and good dishes." It was rare for old General Shui and old General Ma to be united. There was no question of who was bigger or smaller, or who could urinate higher or further. It seemed that they were ready to make a killing on Li Yi. Li Yi smiled and said, "Rest assured, old generals. Today, I will personally cook and treat you well." Li Han had originally planned to sneak out with Duan Wu, but Li Yi conveniently grabbed him as a helper. In the entire capital, Li Yi really could not find a more qualified roaster than him. The fish caught from the lake of the Mathematics Institute were still fresh, and there was no shortage of sauce. All that was left was Li Han. Dong Wenyun came together with the Shen family and the Wang family. Dong Wenyun was the son-in-law of the Shen family. The Shen family could be considered as one family with two prime ministers and an imperial concubine in the palace. However, the Wang family's empress gave birth to the crown prince. It was hard to say who would be the final winner. However, at least on the surface they seemed to be in harmony. There were also some relatives of the Li family, but there were only a few of them. Wei Liang and Yang Yanzhou also chose to freeload today. Li Yi reckoned that he had to find a few helpers. Otherwise, he would not be able to handle so many people at once. Today, the Jiang of Silla residence, from the inside to the outside, from the master to the servants, everyone was exceptionally busy. Wei Xian stood at the entrance of the Jiang of Silla residence and hesitated for a long time. He did not know whether he should step in or not. After he returned, he thoroughly investigated the information about the Jiang of Silla. The results of the investigation made him unable to sleep for the entire night. His poetry was unparalleled. Even an uneducated child could recite a few sentences. Every word of his could be sold at a sky-high price. He had never seen anyone whose calligraphy was sold at a price of a word. He had reached the peak of what a scholar could achieve. He improved the art of interrogation by torture and reduced the number of cruel officials in the Jing kingdom. He offered the horseshoes and created the Heavenly Punishment Society. The army of the Jing kingdom was invincible and invincible. With his own strength, he repelled the diplomatic mission of the Qi kingdom and preserved the dignity of the Jing kingdom. He established the school of mathematics and started a new school of mathematics. He eliminated a large number of vermin in the court. The politics, economy, military, commerce, agriculture of the Jing kingdom. As long as Wei Xian could think of it, the shadow of Jiang of Silla could be seen. Because of this, he was trusted by the emperors of two dynasties. He became the youngest minister of the imperial court in history, and the only foreign official in the history of the Jing kingdom to be conferred the title of prince. He had also reached the peak of what an official could achieve. Such a person should be valued by the emperors. However, due to various reasons, he left the capital city for 5 years. Wei Xian admired the Jiang of Silla very much. He even prostrated himself before him. Wei Xian admitted that the officials had wronged him. However, Xuzhou was the Jing kingdom's Xuzhou, not the Jiang of Silla's Xuzhou. He handed the name card to the concierge and said, "Please report that I, Wei Xian, request to meet the Jiang of Silla." Chapter 1168. The gatekeeper of the Jiang of Silla residence was especially busy today. Usually, only one person was needed to guard the door, but today, there were 5 people on duty. Those who came to the residence today were either high-ranking officials or dignitaries. His Highness could afford to neglect them, but the gatekeeper could not. Hearing that the visitor reported his official title as Minister in Charge, one of the gatekeepers immediately became alert. He accepted the name card and stepped forward. "Sir, please come in." Today, some people who came to the Jiang of Silla residence would hand over their name cards and invitations according to the rules, but some people swaggered in, such as the old generals just now. They did not need to check the invitations one by one. In the entire capital, no one dared to freeload or cause trouble during the banquet of the Jiang of Silla residence. The gatekeeper led him through more than half of the residence, pointed to a courtyard in front and said, "This lowly one will escort you here, so can go in by yourself." Wei Xian took a deep breath and stepped in. Then he saw such a scene. Old General Ma pointed at Old General Shui's nose and scolded, "You old thing, there are only 2 drumsticks in total, and you actually want to monopolize them." Old General Shui had a drumstick in his mouth, but he was not to be outdone and scolded back. "Old thing, you still have the nerve to scold me? Just now, that jar of 30 years old wine was completely drunk by you. Did I say anything?" Old General Shui and Old General Ma were pointing at the sky and scolding each other. Right Prime Minister Dong Wenyun and Minister of Revenue Tsang Shichen clinked their glasses. The person lying under the table and being carried into the room was the capital governor, Liu Daiyou. Minister of Justice Liu Yishui was serving dishes to the old generals. The 2 people in the innermost area should be the envoys of the Wu kingdom and the Qi kingdom. If he was not mistaken, the one squatting there grilling fish and crying because of the smoke was the Dean of the Divinity Academy, Prince Jin, Li Han. From his angle he could see the kitchen. The figure bustling about in the kitchen was none other than Jiang of Silla. Beside him were Princess Shaoning and Princess Royal. Wei Xian did a rough count. More than half of the 20 members of the State Council were here. 1 Prime Minister, 2 ambassadors, 3 ministers, and 4 old generals. In this small courtyard, more than half of the core forces in the imperial court of the Jing kingdom had gathered. "Hey, Lord Wei is here too. Why are you so late? Come sit here." Dong Wenyun's voice came from beside him. Wei Xian turned his head and was pulled to the table in a daze. He opened his mouth. "Prime Minister Dong." Dong Wenyun smiled and said, "There's no Prime Minister Dong here, and we're not talking about national affairs today. Let's drink, let's drink." After saying that, the wine glass in front of Wei Xian was filled to the brim. Li Yi was busy in the kitchen alone. He was cursing these bastards in his heart. They were indeed unreliable. His Emingzu and Shaoning were still the most considerate. When the last dish was out of the pot, he washed his hands and walked out of the kitchen. Li Xian's figure came in time from outside the courtyard. Not only him, but his empress and imperial concubine were also there. Li Xian had always been good at timing. It was neither early nor late. He used to freeload alone, but now his whole family came together. Since his daughter had been freeloaded by his family, he would let him freeload again this time. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty, Your Majesty, and imperial concubine." At several banquets in the courtyard, even those who were drunk instantly sobered up and immediately stood up to salute. Li Xian waved his hand and said, "You don't have to be so polite today. You can eat your own." Although he said so, it didn't matter whether he came or not. Now no one dared to be presumptuous. Even the 2 old generals' quarreling voices were much lower. Li Xian and his empress and imperial concubine naturally had to sit in the room. Emingzu and Shaoning were at the same table with them. Li Han, who had just gotten rid of his mission of grilling fish, could only sigh and squat back to grill another fish. "You invited guests, but you didn't call me." Li Xian was quite dissatisfied with this. Li Yi would rather brag to the 2 old generals than let Li Xian come and spoil everyone's mood. He had a feeling that the number of times he would be spoiled by Li Xian in the future would increase. Li Xian picked up a mouthful of food and looked at Li Yi. He asked, "When are you leaving?" "After the 15th. Li Yi thought for a moment. He didn't want to stay in the capital for too long. Li Xian sighed and said, "I don't think I'll leave so soon. I'll at least wait until Zhe is 1 year old." Li Yi looked at him warily and asked, "Where are you going?" "Shuzhou." Li Xian said matter-of-factly, "I plan to move the Academy of Sciences there when the time comes. Build me another base in Rui City." Up until now, Li Yi still hadn't figured out why Li Xian was able to say such shameless things so easily. Did he kidnap his daughter or sister? Even if he did kidnap his daughter or sister, wasn't his request too much? Li Yi looked at him and asked, "You don't want to be the emperor anymore?" Li Xian glanced at him and said, "Don't you have the crown prince?" Li Yi looked behind him. Li Xian's crown prince was lying on the bed asleep with 4 palace maids watching over him. "Your crown prince can decide the affairs of the country for you? Don't you have the State Affairs Council? What if the State Affairs Council can't decide?" "Brother sir, the fish is here." Li Han brought the grilled fish over. Li Yi looked at Li Han and didn't say anything. Li Xian picked up a piece of fish and looked at Li Yi. He suddenly said, "I plan to make Duanwu a princess. What do you think?" Hearing Duanwu's name, Li Han immediately pricked up his ears. Li Yi shook his head. "I don't have any objections. Duanwu and Xiao Han are a perfect match. However, she has the status of a princess. If she marries Xiao Han, others won't gossip about her." Li Xian looked at Li Han and asked, "Xiao Han, you're going to be 18 soon. Brother plans to betroth Duanwu to you. It's time for you to fulfill your marriage with the Wang family. Why don't we do it together?" Li Han was overjoyed, but his face was serious. "It's all up to you, brother." Li Xian nodded his head and said, "Brother has to go out for a while. Zaire is too young to be the crown prince. As his uncle, you should help him. Brother plans to let you be the regent for the time being. What do you think?" Li Han picked up a piece of fish and almost dropped it on the ground. It turned out to be a multiple-choice question. A. Marry Duanwu and Ling Er. B. Regent. This was not a single-choice question. Either A and B choose at the same time, or neither. Li Han took a deep breath and sighed. "It's all up to you, brother." The officials in the courtyard didn't know that their emperor used a meal to change the structure of the Jing kingdom for the next few years or even more than 10 years. There are gains and losses. The current Prince Jean, the future Prince Regent, will regard this truth as the true meaning of life for a long time. The banquet ended earlier than Li Yi expected. Because of Li Xian, the officials present all took their leave after eating and drinking their fill. Li Yi stood in the courtyard side and said, "Why do you think the late emperor passed the throne to you?" Li Xian looked depressed. "I don't want to." A figure crawled out from under the table. He patted the dust on his body and bowed. "This official greets your majesty and Jiang of Silla." Li Yi looked at him. "This is Wei Xian, Minister of Revenue." Li Xian looked at him and said in surprise, "You don't know the guest you invited?" Li Yi didn't know this Minister of Revenue. It was reasonable to say that a dignified Minister of Revenue shouldn't be here for a meal. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Minister Wei, what's the matter?" Today, Wei Xian ate the chicken cooked by Jiang of Silla and the fish roasted by Prince Jean. He also saw the many ministers and pillars of the court. Standing in this small courtyard and standing in the main hall was a completely different side. He also heard the conversation between His Majesty and Jiang of Silla. This official admires His Highness Jiang of Silla very much. He took a step back and bowed to Li Yi. "I heard that His Highness is leaving." This official came uninvited to see His Highness off. "I hope His Highness doesn't mind." During the uprising in Yangliuking, he made use of the contradictions between the landlords and the peasants, and between the aristocratic families and the country gentry. Basically speaking, the interests of the aristocratic families were at stake. Under this historical background, it was impossible for those large clans that occupied a large amount of resources to be completely wiped out. There needed to be a balance between them, and this balance was not so easy to achieve. A few days ago, Li Yi had already received the news that Rui had gone to the Wu Kingdom. After the matter in the capital was settled, they would first return to Rui City and stay for a few days before going to the Wu Kingdom. Li Yi nodded and said, "In a few days, I will go to the capital to take a look." A look of joy appeared on Wei Liang's face as he said, "That couldn't be better." After Wei Liang left, Li Yi also walked out of the small courtyard. Voices came from the roof. "Xiao Rui, I'm leaving soon. You have to miss me. Father said that when my brother grows up a little, I will be able to go and find you." "How old will you be when you grow up a little?" "Oh my, very soon. In a month? At the very least, I'll have to wait for a year." "Ah, that's a long time." "It's a little long, but by then, we will have already grown up. Why don't you marry me, then we won't have to be separated." "Okay." "What if Uncle Li doesn't agree?" Then we will elope." Li Yi did not know that the eldest young master of the Li family had already planned to elope with the eldest princess. He left the prince's mansion and went to the imperial palace. He and Mingzu stood in front of a palace. This was an independent palace, surrounded by a high outer wall, forming an enclosed courtyard. In fact, there were not many people living in the imperial palace. Li Xian and the others lived in Hibiscus Garden, so did the Empress Dowager and old princess. The other concubines of the former emperor were also arranged by Li Xian to live in other courtyards. The imperial palace had become a cage. And this palace was a cage within a cage. Naturally, there would be prisoners in the cage. "Let me out, you traitors, traitors! Save me, where are the imperial guards? Come and save me! Open the door for me. I want to go to the imperial court. The imperial court cannot do without me. The Jing kingdom cannot do without me." This was a voice that Li Yi had almost forgotten. When the king of Shu was captured, he pretended to be crazy. Li Xian kept him here, so he did not have to worry about food and drink. Every once in a while, he would send some books in to relieve his boredom, but he was not allowed to step out of the palace. This palace door, except for a small hole at the bottom for delivering food and other things, had not been opened for a long time. Li Mingzu looked at a eunuch in front and said, "Open the door." "Yes." The eunuch took out a key from his pocket, inserted it into the keyhole, and opened the lock. Li Yi walked forward, put one hand on the door, and pushed it open. Creak. Soon, a heavy, almost decaying sound was heard. A man sat in the front courtyard. His clothes were messy, his hair was unkempt, and his face was dirty. He looked like a beggar. He looked at the open door in a daze, and an ecstatic expression appeared on his face. he said happily. Is someone here to save me? When I get out, I will make you the Prime Minister. He quickly got up from the ground and ran outside. Halfway through, he saw a figure in front of the door. He suddenly stopped in his tracks, and an expression of extreme horror appeared on his face. It was as if he had seen a man-eating demon. He ran back at a faster speed than when he came, ran into the main hall, and quickly closed the door. Don't come over, don't come over. An extremely terrified voice came from inside the palace door. Li Yi did not force his way in, although it was very easy for him. He stood at the door for a moment, put a jar of wine in front of the door, and left with Mingzu. After an unknown period of time, the palace door slowly opened. The king of Shu leaned against the door and picked up the jar of wine. After a moment of shock, he pulled out the cork and gulped it down. The wine poured down his neck. He looked up and laughed, but tears came out of his eyes. He suddenly smashed the wine jar and shouted, I want to see Li Xian. The king of Shu no longer clamored to be the emperor. He walked out of the prison-like palace and entered a mausoleum. In that mausoleum, he was no longer restricted. It was a royal cemetery. After noble concubine Cui hanged herself, Li Xian specially allowed her to be buried there. Except for the empress, the concubines, and the especially favored concubines, all the concubines of the past emperors were buried there. And Li Yi was in the real imperial mausoleum. He brought a large jar of wine, a few dishes, and a bowl of white fungus and lotus seed soup. The temperature of the white fungus and lotus seed soup was a little too high, and the white fungus was boiled apart, which affected the taste. With Li Yi's cooking skills, he should not have made such a mistake. However, the first meal that the former emperor treated him to was this taste. Changde stood behind him, slightly absent-minded. Opposite Li Yi, there was a set of bowls and chopsticks, but no one was sitting there. He smiled and said, Your Majesty, I hope you don't mind that I brought food and wine to see you after such a long time. He opened the jar of wine and poured half of it on the ground. The Jing kingdom is getting better and better, and this is all thanks to you. Li Xian doesn't want to be the emperor, and I can't force him. I may not be able to do what I promised you in the past. Also, I admit that you are very wise, but you really gave birth to a silly son. But your daughters are all very good, Li Yi muttered to himself as he continued to drink. Before he knew it, he had finished the remaining half of the jar of wine. He was drunk and leaned on the table, murmuring, Usually, no one dares to bring wine here. This time, you can drink to your heart's content. In the future, I will try to visit you once a year. Don't kick me in my sleep again. Chapter 1170. After the Upper Yuan dynasty, there was no festive atmosphere in the capital. Everything remained the same. Many things happened at the beginning of the year, such as the birth of the crown prince, the establishment of diplomatic relations between Jing and Wu, and the resistance against Qi to aid Zhao. This should be the most eventful beginning of the year for the Jing kingdom in recent years. The cold of spring had not passed, and the sky had just brightened. There were already many vendors who had woken up early on the streets of the capital. The vendor who sold breakfast exhaled and rubbed his hands vigorously. He said, The business is still good during the new year. One day is equivalent to half a month's business. It would be great if the new year was celebrated every day. The butcher who was 10 feet away mocked him. Then why do you have a stall? Go home and hug your wife while dreaming. Every day is the new year. Give me 2 steamed buns and a bowl of porridge. A man who had woken up early for work turned his head to look at the butcher and said, Don't forget to leave 2 caddies of lean meat stuffing for me today. I'll make dumplings at home tonight. The butcher waved his hand and said, I didn't forget to make dumplings on the 1st and 15th day of the new year. This strange rule of yours hasn't changed in the past few years. The man smiled and said, We were poor a few years ago. Now we have to eat back all the money we owe. The butcher said while cutting the meat, Then you should eat meat every day. The man took a bite of the bun and said vaguely, If the people in the capital ate meat every day, the happiest person would be you, Butcher Zheng. It was really hard to do business in the past few years. There were wars every day, and the people didn't have much money left. We couldn't even sell the steamed buns. The vendor who sold breakfast added. The man drank a mouthful of porridge and said coldly, It's all because of that King Qi kingdom. Why can't they know their place? In the past, they teamed up with the Zhao kingdom to fight us, and now they're fighting the Zhao kingdom. They even beat their own people. Butcher Zheng chopped the meat and said, "It's all thanks to His Highness Jiang of Silla's heavenly punishment. Otherwise, I'm afraid we'd still be bullied. Sigh, I heard that His Highness returned to the capital a few days ago. I wonder if he'll leave this time." "With His Highness not in the capital, there hasn't been a big event in the capital for years. Let's go." The man finished his breakfast and left behind a few copper coins. He wiped his mouth and said, "2 days ago, when I passed by the gate of the Jiang of Silla's manor, the main gate of the manor was already closed. The commander's tent in the center of the tents was completely dark. Coughing sounds could be heard from a small, inconspicuous tent. In front of Zhao Yi was a map. A city was drawn on the map. He had already circled a few of the city gates in red. A general looked at him and said worriedly, "Your Majesty, Lord Yang has sent news that reinforcements from the Jing Kingdom will arrive in half a month." Zhao Yi opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His coughing became even more intense. Someone looked at him and couldn't help but say, "Your Majesty, it's getting late. You'd better get some rest. We'll discuss this matter tomorrow." Zhao Yi covered his mouth and coughed for a while. Then, his breathing gradually calmed down. He clenched his fist and waved his hand. In a slightly hoarse voice he said, "Pass down my order. Tomorrow, we attack the city." "Yes, Your Majesty." Several generals in the tent shouted and half knelt on the ground at the same time. After everyone had left the tent, Zhao Yi unclenched his fist and stared blankly at the trace of blood on his palm. In the Wu Kingdom. It was late at night. In an even more serene hall in the depths of the imperial palace. The crown that symbolized the emperor had been worn for a long time was a little heavy. Yang Liuqing was still not used to it. She took it off and put it aside. Then, she opened another booklet. She flipped through it and saw that it was the same content as before. Then she threw it aside. "If those people still don't know what's good for them, I'll teach them a lesson myself." An old voice came from a corner of the hall. Yang Liuqing shook her head and said, "In fact, what they said is not unreasonable." The old man looked surprised. "You?" Yang Liuqing stood up and walked into the hall. Then she said, "In any case, I'll still pass the throne in the future. The next emperor of the Wu Kingdom must also have the bloodline of the Yang family." The old man was gloomy for a moment and asked, "Among those people they proposed, is there anyone you like?" Yang Liuqing shook her head. The old man lowered his head and seemed to be thinking about something. A figure appeared in his mind with a slightly angry expression. "Bastard, you were so active at that time. Where have you gone now? This dress is very nice." A voice suddenly rang out in the hall. Yang Wanli's hair stood on end. He suddenly looked in a certain direction. The next moment, he breathed a sigh of relief. Then, the expression on his face became even more shocked. You've broken through." Yang Liuqing's face lit up. She hurried over and said, "Master." Chapter 1171. It took him more than half a month to return to Xuzhou from the capital city. Mainly in consideration of the two old ladies' health, Li Yi deliberately slowed down. He would rather take a long detour than take the dangerous mountain path. It was just after the Lantern Festival when he left. When he arrived in Xuzhou, it was almost April. Rui, Li Mu, and Li Jin accompanied the two old ladies. Shaoning would not leave this time. Yongning was naturally happy. Li Duan was also very happy because Shaoning spoiled him the most. His closeness to Shaoning must have been established since she took care of him when he was a child. Whether it was the capital city or other places, Li Yi always felt very depressed. As for Shu Prefecture and Rui City, they stood among the rolling mountains. Looking into the distance, they felt that every breath of air they breathed was free. He began to understand Li Xian a little. In addition to being more shameless than him, Li Xian also longed for freedom more than him. In April, the mountains were already covered with lush greenery. Li Yi stood at the peak and looked down. Amidst the lush greenery of the mountain, there were light-colored ribbons that stretched far into the distance. It was a wide cement road that connected all the mountains. It was also the most important mountain path in the fringelands. "What are you thinking about, my husband?" A soft voice came from behind him. Li Yi turned around and saw Rui standing there. He had an illusion that Rui seemed to be standing there the whole time. Whether he was in Qing Prefecture, the capital city, the Qi Kingdom, or the Wu Kingdom, it seemed that there was always a figure standing behind him. He could see her as soon as he turned around. Lying on the grass, Li Yi put his hands behind his head and said, "I had a dream last night. I dreamed that one day when I woke up, I was in another place." Sitting beside him, Rui bent her legs and asked, "What kind of place was it?" Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "A very large library, surrounded by bookshelves. The bookshelves were filled with books, books that could not be finished in a lifetime. When I woke up, you, Rui, and Xiaofan were not beside me. It was as if I was a person from another world, and everything here was just a dream." In fact, Li Yi often had such a dream. He often woke up in the middle of the night and couldn't sleep anymore. Putting her hand on his head, Rui gently pressed it and said, "You must be too tired, my husband. I have been here the whole time." Li Yi held her hand and said, "What if I really came from another world?" Looking down at him, Rui said, "My husband came from another world. Actually, I have something that I have been hiding from you." She took a deep breath as if she had made a big decision. Looking at Li Yi, she said seriously, "Actually, I am a fairy from heaven. I accidentally fell into the mortal world and lost my mana." Li Yi was startled. After staring at her for a long time, he suddenly sat up and pushed her down on the grass. Smiling, he said, "Is that so? My wife is a fairy. Then I want to see how a fairy from heaven is different from a woman in the mortal world." Rui was a grandmaster. Li Yi couldn't beat her, but when he teased her, she was just a weak woman. This was different from Rui. After a while, her breathing became a little rapid. She moved away from Li Yi's hand and said hurriedly, "My husband, don't make trouble." Li Yi rested his head on her lap and said, "Fortunately, I didn't run away the night Rui took me up the mountain. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to marry such a fairy wife." Rui looked at him and said in surprise, "You wanted to run away at that time?" "Of course I do." Li Yi nodded and said, "I didn't know you were such a fairy at that time. What if you were a man with a face full of fat and weighed 200 pounds? I might as well die." Rui combed her slightly messy hair and asked with interest, "Then why didn't you run away later? Were you subdued by my beauty? Do you want to hear the truth or a lie?" Rui thought for a while and said, "Lie first." "Lie." Li Yi looked at her and said, "Of course I found out that you were such a peerless beauty. I was subdued by your beauty. When you opened the door and came in, I even thought of the names Dwainer and Xiaomu." "That's a lie." Rui looked at him with a smile. She moved her hand away from his head and put it on his waist. She asked, "What's the truth?" Feeling the movement on his waist, Li Yi smiled and said, "What truth? What I said just now was the truth. It couldn't be more true." He immediately felt a pain on his waist. Rui looked at him and said, "If you don't say it, you can sleep with Sister Emingzu or Sister Wanru tonight." Of course not. Emingzu and Wanru hadn't entered the room yet. They definitely wouldn't let him enter the room. Although Rui usually didn't fight for anything, Ruoqing and Zuemo would definitely listen to her, not to mention Xiaohuan. Li Yi thought for a while and said, "Actually, I wanted to wait for you to come in, knock you out, and then run. But then you smashed the solid wooden table with a single slap." Li Yi was still a little scared when he thought about it. "If I ran at that time, would you hit me?" "Yes." Rui nodded without hesitation and said, "I would still do it now." There was no good result from telling the truth. Every once in a while, Li Yi would be able to come up with a famous saying. Women only wanted to listen to good things, regardless of whether they were true or not. This was like how they could say they weren't beautiful, that their faces were thick, and that their buttocks were round, but men definitely couldn't go along with what they said. Otherwise, they would be courting death. Lies would always be rewarded with erotic rewards. If he told the truth, he would be beaten. Chapter 1172. In the room, Xiaoning rubbed Li Duan's head and said, "They didn't elope. They went to find Aunt." Li Duan was relieved and murmured, "I thought father and mother didn't want me and Xiao Mu and Xiao Jin anymore." Xiaoning comforted him and then bent down to look at him. She asked, "Now can you tell me who taught you to elope?" Li Duan was startled and ran outside, but Xiaoning grabbed his ear. Xiaoning pinched his face and said, "You're so young. You should learn to elope. Didn't Xiao Nyang elope with father?" You even learned to talk back. Is your butt itching again? Li Duan covered his ears and his heart sank. Xiaonyang changed. Xiaonyang was no longer the Xiaonyang who bought him candies. How did Xiaonyang change? It seemed that he couldn't tell Xiaonyang about eloping with Xiao Rui, but he could tell Xiao Mu. Xiao Mu was still young and didn't even know what eloping was. He didn't need to be afraid of others knowing, and he didn't need to keep it to himself. Xiaoning slapped Li Duan's butt a few times and told him to study hard and practice martial arts. Then she went to another yard. Emingzu sat in the study and opened an envelope. Xu Ning walked in. Seeing that she was reading carefully, he stuck his head out to take a look. This letter was a spy from the imperial court. The Jing kingdom sent 30,000 soldiers and 100,000 soldiers from the Zhao kingdom to the imperial capital of the Zhao kingdom as reinforcements. This time, the emperor of the Qi kingdom led 300,000 soldiers. Of course, this 100,000 soldiers were not enough. However, there were still more than 100,000 soldiers in the imperial capital of the Zhao kingdom. With the help of Tian Fa, they didn't need to fear the Qi kingdom. This letter arrived today, which meant that they had been in the imperial capital of the Zhao kingdom for at least a month. The next letter should be the news of victory. She sat down at the desk and said, "Royal sister, we're already here. Why are you still reading these things?" This time, the Jing kingdom supported Zhao against Qi, not because the Jing kingdom had nowhere to use its power, nor was it a whim of the imperial court. It was a decision made after much consideration. This involved a series of political and interest factors, and to a large extent, it would change the structure of the countries in the next few decades. However, Shou Ning would not understand these things. She put down the letter and asked, "Aren't you teaching Yongning martial arts? Why is she here again?" Xiao Mu pestered her to go play on the slide. Xiaoning took the letter and looked at it. She shook her head and said, "When will Xiao Rui come? It's more lively when there are more people." May of the 5th year of Jinghe. It was the end of spring and the beginning of summer, one of the most pleasant months of the year. In May, not only did the warm wind of early summer sweep across the land, but there was also a thunderous news. In the lotus garden of the Jing kingdom, when Li Xian woke up from his afternoon nap, he found several old generals standing in front of the palace with solemn expressions. In the Wu kingdom, the imperial court meeting had just ended. The officials walked out of the main hall, their faces still filled with disbelief. A month ago, the capital of the Zhao kingdom, Qiang, was conquered by the Qi kingdom. The civil and military officials in the imperial city, including the king of the Zhao kingdom, were all captured. The reinforcements, including the 30,000 elites of the Jing kingdom, were all captured, except for those who died in battle. It was said that the Qi kingdom's soldiers suffered great losses because of the heavenly punishment of the Jing kingdom during the battle. However, not long after the two armies started fighting, the sunny weather suddenly became overcast with dark clouds. Sand and pebbles flew everywhere, followed by heavy rain. The heavenly punishment lost its power, and the army of the Qi kingdom turned the tide in a short period of time, winning the Battle of Qiang. Thus, the Zhao kingdom was destroyed. In the Jing kingdom, the morning court meeting, which had not been held for many days, had lasted for several hours today. The army of the Jing kingdom, which had been invincible, and had created many legends, had suffered a setback for the first time in these years. The soldiers and generals who were captured by the Qi kingdom were a problem that needed to be dealt with. The defeat of this battle was also very important. A civil official said with great regret, "This is an unfavorable time. If it weren't for the heavenly punishment, our army would have been defeated." Bull *T. Old General Shui did not care that this was the court meeting. He pointed at his nose and scolded, "Is the Jing kingdom's army only relying on heavenly punishment?" Old General Ma was so angry that his beard was trembling. He pointed at his nose and shouted, "The Qi kingdom has 300,000 soldiers. That's an army of 300,000 soldiers, not 300,000 pigs." With heavenly punishment, the Jing kingdom had obtained countless victories in the past few years. This caused most people in the court to forget how powerful the Qi kingdom was in the past. The strength of the country and the strength of the army allowed them to crush and humiliate the Jing kingdom for decades. Although heavenly punishment had given the Jing kingdom a few years to turn around, the Qi kingdom was still the Qi kingdom. They had not become weaker. Without heavenly punishment, the Jing kingdom would not have much of an advantage against the Qi kingdom. Moreover, this time, They were fighting against the Qi kingdom's 300,000 soldiers with only 100,000 soldiers. This was a heavy blow to the Jing kingdom from the Qi kingdom. However, for the Jing kingdom, the significance of this incident was more than just a crushing defeat. The Minister of War, Yan Bing, stepped forward and bowed. Your Majesty, for the safety of the captured soldiers, we need to send messengers to negotiate with the Qi kingdom as soon as possible. The capital governor Lu Dayou pondered for a long time. Finally he stepped forward and said, Your Majesty, the captured soldiers are important. But this time, the Zhao kingdom has brought a large amount of heavenly punishment. I'm afraid that it has fallen into the hands of the Qi kingdom. If they obtain the formula of heavenly punishment. Lu Dayou did not finish his words, but the entire imperial court broke out in a cold sweat and fright. Heavenly punishment was the Jing kingdom's divine weapon. They all knew very well how powerful it was. If the formula of heavenly punishment fell into the hands of the Qi kingdom, they dared not imagine the consequences. They could not afford to bear it. This meant that in the future, every war with the Qi kingdom would be a war of heavenly punishment. There would be more casualties than any previous war. This meant that the Jing kingdom's military advantage, which they had painstakingly built up, would be gone. After the morning court session ended, it seemed that the entire sky above the capital city was shrouded in a layer of dark clouds. In a restaurant in a certain province of the Wu kingdom. The Qi kingdom. The Qi kingdom has annihilated the Zhao kingdom. The Zhao kingdom. The Zhao kingdom is gone just like that? That's right. Even the emperor has been captured. And the Jing kingdom's reinforcements have also become prisoners. Doesn't the Jing kingdom have heavenly punishment? How could they lose? It's said that the Jing kingdom's army gained a lot of advantages by relying on heavenly punishment. However, when the emperor of the Qi kingdom personally led the army to stand on the city wall, the weather was sunny. Suddenly, a strong wind blew and heavy rain poured down. The heavenly punishment of the Jing kingdom became useless. I heard that the Qi kingdom's emperor invited the Sea Dragon King to help and extinguish the heavenly punishment of the Jing kingdom. The small restaurant was now crowded with people. The destruction of the Zhao kingdom was a big deal to them. Because the Zhao kingdom had always been stronger than the Wu kingdom. Even the Zhao kingdom was destroyed by the Qi kingdom. If the Qi kingdom pointed its blade at them, would the Wu kingdom be able to withstand it? In a very short time, the whole restaurant was in a state of panic. In a remote corner of the restaurant, Li Yi withdrew his gaze from the crowd. Chapter 1173. There was a famous battle in history called the Battle of Kuanyang. In the Battle of Kuanyang, Lu Xiao defeated Wang Mang's army of 400,000 with only 20,000 soldiers. This was a famous example of a battle in which one side defeated many. 20,000 people against more than 400,000. This seemed like an impossible task. However, in the Battle of Kuanyang, a meteor flew into the enemy's camp. During the battle, strong winds blew and torrential rain poured. In an extremely short period of time, many extremely bad weather conditions appeared. With the help of the celestial phenomenon, Lu Xiao won the Battle of Kuanyang, which seemed almost impossible under the circumstances. Because of this, Emperor Guangwu of Han was jokingly called the Son of the Dimension and the Great Magister by later generations. Although Zhao Yi didn't summon meteors to help like Emperor Guangwu, the news of him inviting the Sea Dragon King had already spread to several countries. Li Yi didn't really believe in the Son of the Dimension and luck. However, he couldn't deny that Zhao Yi's luck was extremely good. Rui sat beside him and said softly, "Husband?" Li Yi retracted his gaze and shook his head. "It's okay. We've finished eating and rested for the night. In less than 10 days, we'll reach the Wu Kingdom's imperial capital." He had expected the Qi Kingdom to defeat the Zhao Kingdom, but he didn't expect it to be so fast. They practically swept through everything in their way and headed straight for the Zhao Kingdom's imperial capital. Although they could conquer the Zhao Kingdom in an extremely short period of time, it exposed a bigger problem. After conquering the Zhao Kingdom, they would need to spend a lot of effort to suppress the rebels in the Zhao Kingdom. This would take a very long time. This wasn't Zhao Yi's style of doing things. A hint of doubt appeared on Li Yi's face. What was Zhao Yi so anxious about? Zhao Kingdom. Qiang. The original capital had become the capital of a fallen country. A month ago, Qiang City was conquered. The king of the Zhao kingdom and his concubines, the royal family of the Zhao kingdom, and all the officials were captured. Inside the palace, the officials gathered together once again. Your Majesty committed suicide for his country yesterday. A middle-aged scholar stood in front of the hall and said calmly, "A fine bird chooses a good tree to nest in. Grand Tutor, the Zhao kingdom has fallen. Why are you so stubborn?" Ha ha ha. Opposite him, a white-haired old man threw his head back and laughed wildly. A loyal subject does not serve two masters. The Zhao kingdom has fallen. His Majesty has died for his country. I, along with the Zhao kingdom, will die with his Majesty. He turned around, looked at the crowd behind him and shouted, "Who's going with this old man?" A middle-aged official stepped forward and laughed. "This lowly official is willing to go with Grand Tutor." A young official walked out and shouted, "I'm willing to die with you. Since the country has fallen, your subjects shall die. The ministers of a fallen nation have no face to continue living. Let's go together." In an instant, more than 10 figures stepped forward. "Fellow colleagues, this old man will take his leave first." The white-haired old man laughed, stamped his feet, and hit his head on a pillar in the hall. He died instantly. Grand Tutor's legs are not good. This lowly official will also go first. On the way to hell, he will have a walking stick. An official smiled, suddenly pulled out a guard's long saber and cut his own neck. "You are only a 5th-rank official. How dare you compete with me for the walking stick of the Grand Tutor?" Another official snorted, picked up the long saber on the ground, put it to his neck and cut it open. "Your Majesty, I'm coming with you." Soon, more than 30 bodies were piled up in the hall. Even the surrounding guards had looks of horror on their faces. They couldn't help but distance themselves from the corpses. The middle-aged scholar watched them die one by one, with a calm expression on his face. When the last person shouted, "Die with the country," and stabbed his long saber into his own heart, the crowd was dead silent. Some people were angry, some were ashamed. But in the end, no one walked out. Cough, cough. A few coughs came from outside the hall, and a figure slowly walked into the hall. The middle-aged scholar hurried forward and said worriedly, "Your Majesty." Zhao Yi waved his hand and refused his help. He looked at the corpses in the hall for a long time, then said, "Bury them." The middle-aged scholar nodded and bowed. "As you wish." A person walked in from outside the hall and said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, the envoy of the Jing kingdom has arrived." Zhao Yi nodded and said, "Bring them to the side hall." The middle-aged scholar looked at him and said, "Your Majesty, you should rest for a while. The imperial physician said you can't continue like this." Zhao Yi waved his hand and said in a hoarse voice, "It's okay." The middle-aged scholar's expression changed. He looked at him but did not say anything. In a side hall of the imperial palace, several officials of the Jing kingdom were waiting anxiously. This time, the number of soldiers of the Jing kingdom who had been captured by the Qi kingdom was more than 10,000. When they learned the news, they didn't wait for the imperial court's order and rushed here day and night. They had to bring back these 10,000 soldiers in one piece no matter what. It was 10,000 lives. It was not hard to imagine what harsh conditions the Qi kingdom would offer. This would be an invisible war, and the success or failure of the war depended on them. The door of the side hall was pushed open. They immediately stood up and looked at the door. It was a young man who walked in. Judging by his age, he should be about the same age as their Majesty. But his face was a bit pale, and his steps were a bit unsteady. It seemed that he was not in good health. The leader was about to say something. Zhao Yi waved his hand and asked, "You are here for the captives?" "Yes." The man looked serious and said in a deep voice, "We are here to redeem the 10,000 soldiers of the Jing kingdom. Please give us a condition, Emperor Qi." Zhao Yi was silent for a while. He looked at him and asked, "Do you have a penny?" The ambassadors of the Jing kingdom walked out of the side hall. The sunlight outside sprinkled on them, and they became a little more clear-headed. One of them suddenly looked at his companion and said, "Lord Chen, slap me and see if it hurts." "Pah!" The man slapped him hard on the face without hesitation. Then he lowered his head and looked at his hand, murmuring, "It hurts. It's real." Half of the official's face immediately swelled up. Blood seeped out of the corner of his mouth. One of his teeth even loosened. He looked at Lord Chen with a bewildered expression. The official with the surname Chen patted him on the shoulder. He looked at his bewildered expression and said, "Lord Wei, you don't have to doubt it. What happened just now was real." He knew why Lord Wei was bewildered. It was because he was also bewildered. They had long been convinced that the Qi Kingdom would have to pay a great price to release the 10,000 captives. The Qi Kingdom would certainly offer a condition that they could not imagine. The condition that the Qi Kingdom offered was indeed beyond their imagination. The condition was a penny. 1 copper coin could not buy a loss, and 1 copper coin could not buy a trick. 1 copper coin could bring all the captives back. Those captives had been detained for nearly 2 months. During these days, their food and expenses added up to a terrifying figure. However, Emperor Qi did sign the document for the release of the captives only after paying them a penny. They only needed to bring this document with them to bring all the generals of the Jing Kingdom back home. This negotiation mission had been completed beyond imagination. Not to mention the rewards he would receive when he returned, he could even look forward to having his name recorded in the annals of history. The two left in a hurry without thinking too much. Before Emperor Qi went back on his word, they had to settle this matter in the shortest time possible. By the time they brought all the generals and soldiers out of here, it would be too late for him to go back on his word. In the side hall, Zhao Yi sat alone in front of a table. In front of him was a huge map. On the map, it was clearly divided into 4 regions. The Jing Kingdom, the Wu Kingdom, the Qi Kingdom after annexing the Zhao Kingdom, and the dozens of small countries in the west. Among them, the Qi Kingdom was the largest. Chapter 1174. In the imperial palace of the Zhao Kingdom, the generals of the Qi Kingdom gathered in front of a palace. Inside the palace, an old man with white hair and beard stood in front of the bed. He said solemnly, "Your Majesty, you can't go on like this." Zhao Yi's face was as pale as a piece of paper. He smiled and looked at the old man. He asked calmly, "How much longer do I have?" The old man lowered his head and thought for a while. He said, "If your Majesty can stop, I can extend your life for another 1.5 years." A general walked in from outside the palace and said anxiously, "Your Majesty, how can you release the prisoners of the Jing Kingdom just like that? Get out." Before Zhao Yi could speak, the old man turned his head and said coldly to him. The general looked at him, shrank his head, and walked out dejectedly. Outside the palace, a general glanced at him and said, "Dr. Hua said not to let those trifles disturb His Majesty's thoughts and waste his energy. Why are you going to join in the fun at this time?" The general showed an unconvinced expression and said, "That's 10,000 people. Even if we can't exchange them for divine punishment from Jinghua, we can still exchange them for a lot of other things. These days, they've eaten a lot of our food. Have you calculated how much we've lost if His Majesty just let them go like this? Is this the first time you understand His Majesty's character?" The general looked at him and said, "It is because they are from the Jing Kingdom that His Majesty released them." Hearing this, the general sighed and said no more. When the crown prince besieged the city, His Majesty, as the third prince, owed that person a huge favor. Given His Majesty's character, he would naturally return the favor. Speaking of which, compared to the fool who gave the Qi Kingdom to His Majesty, the 10,000 prisoners that His Majesty gave to the Jing Kingdom were really not enough. Thinking of this, His Majesty felt much better. He could only let out a long sigh as he watched a huge piece of meat slip away from their mouths. In the palace, the old man looked at Zhao Yi and said seriously, "Your Majesty, let's stop here. I will do my best to nurse Your Majesty's body. Don't worry." Zhao Yi smiled and said, "Our journey has just begun. I don't want to die yet." He looked outside and said, "When Mr. Hua goes out, call them in." The old man frowned. "Your Majesty." Zhao Yi smiled. "Just a few words." The old man looked at him and could only sigh in the end. He walked to the door and glared fiercely at the generals, saying, "After you go in, be careful what you say. If His Majesty's condition worsens, I won't forgive you." A few of the Qi Kingdom's generals, who were known for their decisiveness on the battlefield, lowered their heads and nodded in agreement. They would rather offend Her Majesty than Miracle Dr. Hua, because no one knew what kind of suffering awaited them if they offended Miracle Dr. Hua, who was known for his narrow-mindedness. When they walked into the hall, Zhao had already gotten up from his bed and was looking at the huge map. He looked at the generals who came in and said, "I'll leave the rest to you." In an instant, several of them half knelt on the ground and shouted, "We will obey your majesty's decree." The Jing Kingdom. An urgent letter had arrived at the front, causing the morning court session to last an hour longer than usual. An official stood in front of the hall and asked in surprise, "Your Majesty, the Qi Kingdom has released him without any request. Could there be a trap? We have to be on our guard." Another official stood up and said, "Lord Chen and the others have already brought him back to the Jing Kingdom. What other tricks could there be? Perhaps the Qi Kingdom is afraid of the Jing Kingdom's prestige and is showing weakness? I think it's highly possible." In the court, as the officials were discussing, the capital governor Lu Daiyou walked out from the crowd. He cleared his throat and took out a piece of paper from his sleeve, saying, "I've done some research a few days ago. Why don't you take a look?" There was no one in the imperial court who didn't know that this capital governor didn't seem to reveal himself. He might not say a single word in the imperial court for several months on end, but every time he did speak, it was always to the point, even earth-shattering. Therefore, they were still a little afraid of this Lord Lu. The piece of paper he took out this time did not contain any profound or esoteric remarks, but a few sets of simple numbers. The Qi Kingdom, the Jing Kingdom, the Wu Kingdom, and the destroyed Zhao Kingdom accounted for 60% of the famous generals who were active on the battlefield and were well known to the world. From the time the Qi Kingdom attacked the Zhao Kingdom to the time the Zhao Kingdom was destroyed, only 4 months had passed. Before the appearance of Tianfa, the Qi Kingdom and the Jing Kingdom had fought dozens of battles, big and small, and the Jing Kingdom had lost 80% of the battles. After the Qi Kingdom destroyed the Zhao Kingdom, it launched a large-scale expedition to the west. As of today, 7 small countries in the west had been incorporated into the territory of the Qi Kingdom. This thin piece of paper and the data recorded on it were like a vicious slap to the faces of all the courtiers in the hall. This piece of paper told them that without Tianfa, the Jing Kingdom's military strength was far inferior to the Qi Kingdom's. In recent years, the Jing Kingdom's economy had taken off, and the people's lives were stable. Basically, it had reached the peak since the founding of the country. Chapter 1175. In a certain hall in the imperial palace of the Wu Kingdom, Yang Liuqing placed a letter on the table and said, "Master, Uncle Master and the others should arrive tomorrow." Mississippi Lu put down the martial arts books collected by the royal family of the Wu Kingdom and stood up to walk out of the palace. Yang Liuqing watched her walk out and sighed softly. She walked out of the hall and said to Chen Qing, who was waiting there, "Tomorrow, the 2 Uncle Masters will arrive at the imperial capital. I'll have to trouble General Chen to welcome them on my behalf." Chen Qing hurriedly said, "It's no trouble at all. I haven't seen Prince Jiang of Silla for a long time." Chen Qing had followed Yang Liuqing from the land of chaos and fought his way to the imperial capital. He was one of the important officials who assisted Yang Liuqing in his ascension to the throne. His status was equivalent to that of a founding general, and was completely different from how it was a few years ago. Even when envoys from the Jing Kingdom or the Qi Kingdom came, he didn't need to personally go out of the city to welcome them. However, it was different this time. After receiving the order, he hurriedly left. If he didn't bring Wei Liang along to welcome Jiang of Silla tomorrow, he would probably not be finished with him in the future. He would also have to bring Blind Fan along. They had all received kindness and guidance from Jiang of Silla, so these etiquettes were necessary. Mississippi Lu returned to the hall and took out autumn water. She said to Yang Liuqing, "I'll be away for a period of time. Even though you're tired from state affairs, you can't neglect your martial arts. This will be very beneficial to you." Yang Liuqing nodded and said, "I understand." Not long after, the white-haired elder walked into the hall and asked in confusion, "Why did your master leave?" Yang Liuqing thought for a while and said, "Master, she has some matters to deal with." Yang Wanli didn't pursue this matter and suddenly asked, "I heard that Li Brat is coming?" Yang Liuqing nodded and said, "Martial uncle will arrive tomorrow." "That's good." A smile appeared on Yang Wanli's face as he said, "This kid has a lot of wicked ideas and a belly full of evil tricks. When the time comes, let him help you come up with more ideas." Li Yi had seen the capital cities of the Jing Kingdom, the Qi Kingdom, and the Wu Kingdom. Putting aside personal feelings, the capital of the Qi Kingdom should be the most imposing, at least from the outside. Of course, all in all, the capital was more prosperous. The Wu Kingdom's imperial city was the most wretched of the three. Along the way, Li Yi and Rui learned more about Wu Guagua. After a decade of turmoil, the Wu Kingdom wanted to restore its foundation. It was a long-term task and not something that could be done in a short period of time. Yang Liuqing had just ascended to the throne not long ago. Everything in the Wu Kingdom was waiting to be done. Although she had a small notebook that he had specially made for her, nothing could be done in one go. After the civil war ended, the Wu Kingdom's tianfa was no longer supplied to them in the fringe. Li Yi didn't think it was necessary in the past. But now, he might have to change his plan. Every few days, he would hear the news that the Qi Kingdom had annihilated a small country in the west. With the Qi Kingdom's current strength, it was only a matter of time before they swept through the countries in the west. When that time came, on this continent, only the Wu Kingdom and the Jing Kingdom would be left standing in his way of becoming the ruler of the world. If the Qi Kingdom went all out, the Wu Kingdom might not be able to win even with tianfa. If there was no tianfa, then the Zhao Kingdom might very well be a lesson for them. Of course, the Jing Kingdom wouldn't just watch as the Qi Kingdom annexed all the other countries. When that time came, it would truly be time for the reshuffling of the powers on this continent. He and Rui entered the city gate and asked for the location of the imperial palace. Then they walked in that direction. Rui sighed softly and said, "My husband wrote that letter first. If Rui knew that we've arrived, I'm afraid she would hide on purpose." Of course, Li Yi knew that Mississippi Lu would hide on purpose. But if she hadn't figured it out, even if he and Rui appeared without a trace, she would still leave, and it would be more serious than if she had taken the initiative to hide. Li Yi smiled and held her hand. He said, "It doesn't matter. We have nothing to do anyway. We'll chase after her wherever she hides. When she's tired of hiding, she'll naturally come out." The imperial city of the Wu Kingdom was indeed shabby. The roads were full of potholes and sewage and garbage were everywhere. It couldn't even compare to a second-tier city in the Jing Kingdom, let alone the capital which had all been replaced with cement roads. Even the main roads of the important cities in the Jiangxi region of the Qi Kingdom were paved with neatly cut bluestone slabs. Of course, this was also due to Li Yi's own negligence. The little notebook he gave to Yang Liuqing recorded mostly revolutionary experiences. He also touched a little on how to govern the country after seizing the fruits of victory. But there was no mention of these basic constructions. "Get out of the way, get out of the way!" A fine horse galloped from behind, and the pedestrians on the street all dodged to the side. Li Yi and Rui stood on the side of the street and frowned as they watched the young man on the horse galloping away with laughter. There was actually someone galloping wildly on a horse on the main street of the capital. How did Yang Liuqing become the empress? He bent over to help an old man who had accidentally fallen to the ground while dodging. He couldn't help but ask, "There's someone galloping wildly on a horse on the streets of the imperial city. Doesn't the authorities care?" The old man sighed and asked, "Young master, you're not from here, are you?" Li Yi nodded. "There's something you don't know, young master." The old man looked ahead and said, "That person on the horse just now is the young master of the Zhang family. There are several members of the Zhang family who are high-ranking officials in the imperial court. When His Majesty was suppressing that usurper, the Zhang family helped His Majesty a lot. How could the authorities dare to care about this kind of thing? Even if someone really died from the collision, it would be in vain." The His Majesty that the old man was talking about was naturally Yang Liuqing. When Yang Liuqing and the others attacked the imperial city of the Wu Kingdom, they actually didn't expend too much effort, and they didn't use heavenly punishment either. It could even be said that they didn't expend much effort. Because at that time, the original tyrant of the Wu Kingdom was already disloyal and disloyal. The officials, nobles, and various great clans in the imperial city all wanted nothing more than to overthrow his tyranny. When Yang Liuqing and the others fought their way here, the gates of the imperial city were wide open, and the commoners lined the streets to welcome them. They very easily entered the imperial city. But this wasn't a reason for her to indulge these clans. Or perhaps she herself didn't know that these people were actually so arrogant in the imperial city. But no matter what the reason was, if her little martial nephew wanted to become a qualified empress, she still had a very long way to go. She still needed to train her well. There was no training. "Mother, I want to eat candied hawthorn." On the streets of the imperial city, A little girl pointed at a hawker selling candied hawthorn in the middle of the street. She turned her head, looked at her mother, and begged. The woman took out 2 copper coins from her bosom, handed them to her, and said, "I only have 2 copper coins. Go and ask how much 1 candied hawthorn costs." The little girl immediately revealed a smile, and her eyes curved into crescent moons. She ran to the middle of the street, opened her hand, and revealed the 2 copper coins in her hand. She said, "Brother, brother, I want 1 candied hawthorn." The hawker selling the candied hawkers was a youth about 17 or 18 years old. He held a stick in his hand, and on top of the stick was a raised haystack. The haystack was filled with candied hawthorns. He looked at the 2 copper coins in the little girl's hand, rubbed his head, and said with some embarrassment, "My candied hawthorn, 3 copper coins each." The little girl's eyes instantly dimmed. She made an "oh" sound, and turned to walk outside. The youth stood in the courtyard, thought for a moment, and suddenly said, "Little sister, wait a moment." He took a candied hawthorn from the haystack, handed it to her and said, "Forget it, I'll sell one to you for 2 copper coins. Don't tell anyone else. If I sell all of them for 2 copper coins, I'll lose money." The little girl immediately smiled, took the candied hawthorn, and nodded heavily, saying, "Thank you, brother." The youth smiled, turned to leave, and shouted, candied hawthorn, sour and sweet candied hawthorn." The little girl stood in the middle of the street, licked the candied hawthorn, and showed a happy smile. "Get out of the way." On the street, the crowd dodged, and a fast horse galloped from behind. The woman looked at the little girl standing in the middle of the street, and her face instantly turned pale. She cried out involuntarily, "Little girl!" The little girl looked up and saw a big horse rushing towards her. Her body trembled, and the candied hawthorn in her hand fell to the ground. Bang! An extremely dull sound suddenly rang out. The horse fell to the ground, and its head was already broken, and it was no longer breathing. The youth on the horse flew straight out. After landing, his body bent in a strange way, and he lay on the ground, howling miserably. The young man selling the candied hawthorn looked at the scattered candied hawthorn on the ground, and his face showed a look of pity. The candied hawthorn scattered on the ground, and the haystack at the top of the stick also flew out. He pulled off the gray cloth that wrapped the stick, and everyone could see that it was not a wooden stick at all, but an iron stick as thick as a child's arm. It was also because of this that he was able to smash the horse to death with one strike. However, this youth was really strong, and such a thick iron stick in his hand seemed to be weightless. The little girl had already recovered from the shock, and she looked at the youth in a daze and murmured, "Brother, you're so powerful as sun dashing." The youth was stunned when he heard this, and he turned the iron stick in his hand and said embarrassedly, "Is that so?" "Actually, many people say that." You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.